Hello, and welcome back to Reddit Aliens. I'm John, and as always, thank you so much for being here. We've got this extended compilation for you today, and we hope that you enjoy it. If you're listening alone, good. If you've got headphones on, of course, that's even better. So relax and enjoy this long form storytelling. Comment and subscribe, and we'll see you soon. Have you ever had a ghostly or supernatural experience? What was it? Posted 2 days ago. Two situations, both at my parents' house and only when I was there alone overnight. To make this even more strange, my father passed away from cancer a few years ago and was very sick for a while. He told my mom about two ghosts that lived in their house, a girl and her mom, but said they were nice. I'd never told him my encounters, but that confirmed it for me. 1. Nighttime. Parents were gone for a few nights to some event, and my first time ever staying in the house alone. During this time, I never went into their bedroom, and there were no problems the first night or two. On day 3, their alarm clock randomly went off at about 3 or 4 in the morning on a Wednesday. This issue is that they had an old school alarm clock that you could set on or off, and not for certain days of the week. As the only person who had been in the house, and knowing that I, A, hadn't been in their room to accidentally hit it, and B, they wouldn't have set an alarm for that time. Safe to say, I feel something weird happened. 2. Daytime. A year or so after incident 1, parents were again gone for something or other, and I was in the house alone overnight. At the time, we had a lab retriever mixed dog. Dog and I are sitting in the living room, just relating in the afternoon. She is laying on the floor, and I'm sitting on the couch playing on my phone. No TV on, just hanging out. Dog sits up and starts very attentively staring at the wall. Doesn't appear scared, but really odd behavior. All of a sudden, a canvas picture jumps off the wall and falls to the floor in the exact spot the dog was staring. Once I got the courage, I decided to check out the picture or wall to see if there was a solution. Hook was totally fine, as was the hanger on the back of the picture. No explanation. I hung the picture back up, and it's still in the same place at my mom's house now. I had a weird experience not that long ago. Walking through an old antique store in the really old part of town. It's 3 levels, one of which was an old basement type area. Walked around a corner and got an overwhelming feeling I couldn't explain. It felt almost like an anxiety attack, but combined with dizziness. Felt like I was being watched or followed, tough to really explain. I just felt severely uncomfortable. You know that feeling when you're walking toward your front door at night, and in the last 3 steps your subconscious screams, "Run, fool!" and you book it inside? It was like that. Anyway, told the wife, I need to get the hell out of here, and she could see something weirded me out, so we left. When we got upstairs, my wife stopped to look at something at the counter. I stood there trying to process, and the lady behind the counter made eye contact with me. She said, "You alright?" And I replied, yep, I'm good. And she says, "Get weirded out downstairs?" I said, "Actually, yeah, right at the..." And she interrupts and says, "By the corner down there?" I froze and said, "Yeah." And she says, "Yeah, that's because it's haunted as hell down there. Happens to a lot of us. Owner of this place way back was killed or died down there or something. That's what they say anyway." Weirded me out, but it was a neat experience. An auditorium in a theater I managed was haunted. The theater had an automated audio system that would play a pre-recorded radio-style program in between showtimes. The company that uploaded these shows wouldn't update it for months, so we got used to hearing the same 12 songs and jingle-like banter in between them. When we would shut down the projector for the night, we'd also kill the lights in the auditorium. This turned off the speakers as well. So a shut-down booth meant a silent, dark theater. One night, I had my closing usher come up to me and tell me I left the music on in the Theater 10. Funny, Theater 10 last had a show 2 hours ago. I remember shutting it down. Must have only thought I did so. I went back to check it out. Theater 10 was our last theater, all the way in the back of the building, last door at the end of the hallway. It's hard to explain, but basically the door to the booth was inside the theater, and the aisle wrapped around the walls of the booth and opened up into the seating area. From the door to the booth, basically, there was an area around a corner that I couldn't see unless I rounded said corner. I opened the door to the theater, and it's pitch black. If I didn't shut the booth down, the aisle lights would be on, yet, like my usher said, music was still on. This was different music though. I had heard every terrible pop song that program had on it for months. This was different. This was like the kind of piano playing you would hear in an old movie. Almost like in a saloon, but slower and gently played almost like a lullaby. Then I heard a voice singing. The voice was not coming from the speakers. An older woman's voice started singing from right around the corner from where I was standing in the pitch dark. I immediately knew that I wasn't alone in the theater and knew that nobody had been in the theater for 2 hours because the booth was locked. I had shut it down earlier after all. I bolted right out of that theater and hauled ass to my office. The final theater got out and I locked up and went home. Next day I came in and checked the cameras. From the moment I shut down the booth till 2 hours later, nobody went in or out of that auditorium besides my usher and myself. I saw my flee of terror. I forwarded it all night. Nobody came out. I even checked the emergency exit cameras and nothing. I closed for years after that, and I never heard her again, but I always got chills going into that theater and started leaving the emergency lights on when I closed it. I would never be in the dark in that theater again. When I moved into my first apartment, I couldn't find one I could afford that allows pets, so I had to leave my cat with my parents. She got sick unexpectedly and had to be put down. I lived too far away from them to get there to say goodbye. The next weekend I went home to visit my parents. In the middle of the night, I felt her hop up on my pillow and lay next to my ear purring. Half asleep, I pet her. After a few minutes, she jumped down, and I sat up and watched her walk out of the room. Then I remembered she was dead. I never saw her again. I think she just stayed long enough to say goodbye. The house I grew up in was built in the 1850s and was pretty creepy. The guy my parents bought it from said he woke up one night to being hugged from behind. He thought it was his wife, who actually hated the house because she said there were too many dead souls in it, so she apparently stayed at their house in Italy when he was in the US. He turned over and no one was there. I don't know why he was offering this info to potential buyers, but they were all having dinner and drinks, and I guess my mom was kind of saying how she thought that stuff was interesting, so he felt like it was okay. Anyway, I was home for the summer during college and felt something massaging my legs. I sprung up in bed and waved my hand over my legs and nothing was there, but it was still happening. I actually said out loud, "This isn't happening," and turned over and it stopped. Told my older brother about it years later, and he said the same shit happened to him in high school. Lots of other weird stuff happened in that house, but that's the only thing that happened to me directly that I couldn't figure out how to rationalize somehow. When I was 13, I woke up to the silhouette of a lady with her hair up in a bun searching through stuff on my desk. I thought it was my mom at first until I realized this woman was far too skinny to be my mom. I screamed bloody murder and then head darted to look at me, and once I blinked it disappeared. I never told my parents about it until much later. Turns out there was a lady that had died in the house that they were aware of after talking to the house's previous owners. They weren't going to tell me out of fear of scaring me, but when I told them what happened, they told me. I heard a disembodied voice telling me not to be afraid of my abusive parents. I was about 8, and I was crying myself to sleep in the wee hours of the morning. At the time, I thought it was an angel. I now realize I have a mental illness with occasional auditory hallucinations. Medication helps a lot. I lived with a college roommate after college for about 4 years. He dated this girl who continually said she had supernatural things happen to her. In her words, she was haunted, and some of the stories she told me made me strongly believe her. She said she would constantly see a figure standing in the corner of her room that would block the light in the shape of a person like a shadow. She said she would feel something moving in her bed with her. She said her cat would constantly stare at the shadow figure she would see in her room. She said she would have dreams, but she explained it like awake dreams, of there being a girl in her house telling her she has to leave because her, the girl in the dream, mom didn't let them have guests over. She said many years prior, she brought a guy home one night who left in the middle of the night with a text that said something along the lines of, "Hey, I thought you said you lived alone. There was someone in your apartment. I saw them when I got up to use the bathroom." There were more, but it was like 6 years ago now, so I don't entirely remember them all. One night, she told me that in our apartment, she felt something get in bed with her and just assumed it was my roommate. So she turned to cuddle it, and it legitimately felt that there was a person there. She said a few minutes later my roommate came into the room, and then she realized that she was having another haunting episode. I always believed her because she was a terrible bullshitter, had no reason to lie, and just went into such detail about it that it all seemed so real. It got even realer one night. I was sleeping in my bed and woke up in the middle of the night with my door wide open and the hallway light on. Both of these were extremely uncommon because 1, I never sleep with my door open, and 2, I'm a utility Nazi, so I always turn the lights off. It was one of those things where you're still 90% asleep, so you shrug it off and go back to bed. Seconds later, I felt something get in bed with me, the same exact way you would feel someone get in the other side of the bed with you. I felt the pressure of the bed go down from the weight of a person on the other side. I then felt my covers move as someone else was getting comfortable. I then felt an arm go across my chest, as if someone was cuddling me. My body froze, chills head to toe. I couldn't move. It's hard to explain, but it's not that I couldn't move, because the weight of someone's arm on my chest was too heavy to move, but I couldn't move more so in the sense that I was just frozen still, to where physically I was paralyzed, in shock for what felt like ages, but was more realistically 20 seconds. I was able to let out like a haunted, heavy breath yell, and then I felt it get off. Still unable to move, I could see a figure move from the side of my bed to the entryway to my bedroom door where the hallway light was blocked from its shadow. I went and woke my roommate's girlfriend up and told her about it. She could see the terror and horror in my face, and the way I explained my story, she told me that is exactly what has been happening to her for years. It freaked me the fuck out, to say the least. A few, most notably after my grandpa died, I saw his face in the window of my room. I was so scared I ran to my mom. My mom told my dad to call his brothers to check out his dad. He had died earlier in the night. I guess he was saying goodbye. Also, when my best friend died, my electronics started acting wonky. I had a speaker that I'd never had a problem with, and I was playing music on it, and it was the night I found out she died. I had music on to muffle my crying. I was playing a sad song and it kept stopping. I'd go press play, but just before I could, it would turn back on by itself, several times in a row. Eventually, I realized it was stopping on certain words in the lyrics, like it was a message or something, I'm not sure. I also had a light in my car that was dead since the day I got it, old Toyota. It's the overhead light. I never really needed it, so I didn't look into getting it replaced. After a week had passed since my friend's death, the light suddenly flickered on for about a minute and then went out again and never came on ever again. That happened on my birthday. I'm a skeptic when it comes to ghosts, but there's no question that there's some really crazy enough energy out there that causes this stuff. It all felt like too much to be a coincidence. 1. A whole group of us were in a spare bedroom playing games, heard somebody whistling out in the living room. Nobody else was there as far as we knew, but it was a popular place. A couple of us went out there to look, nobody there. A minute later, the other guys came out to see where we were, and we told them. Then the whistling came from the bedroom, through the group of us and into the kitchen where it faded out. We decided to leave. 2. On a vacation, we were driving through northwest New Mexico. There was a spot inside the Navajo reservation my wife really wanted to see, so we were heading there. This was pre-mobile phones and Google Maps, so using the old-fashioned folding maps. Very quiet roads with a few people, buildings. We'd been driving a while, and when I started feeling really uneasy, I couldn't tell you why I thought this, but it felt to me like the land didn't want us there. Figured that was dumb and kept driving. A couple of minutes later, my wife described feeling the same way. That was enough for me, and I turned us south for the quickest way out of the reservation. At some point, we suddenly felt better, and I made a note of the first road we passed. I looked at a map later, and it was right at the edge of the reservation. Might be worth mentioning that I live in Oklahoma and am constantly inside reservations, for one thing or another, with no issues. Was also in other reservations in New Mexico and Arizona with no problems. I lived in this apartment with my girlfriend that had this long hallway with 2 bedrooms in the hallway. Our bedroom was at the end of the hallway. Whenever we went to bed at night, it always felt like something was right behind us. It didn't matter if we went to bed alone or together, it always felt like something was watching you, no matter where you were in the apartment. One morning, I woke up to footsteps in the hallway. I listened for a while, but didn't hear anything else. I laid back down and heard them again. I opened my eyes and the footsteps stopped. I started to drift off again when I felt something slam down on the bed. I jump up and nothing is there. My girlfriend wakes up and walks around the apartment. The doors are locked. The windows are locked. This is going to sound like nonsense, and I don't understand it myself, but I promise this really happened to me. A few years back, I moved up to northern Wisconsin for the summer. I had a good job, some friends already there, and it's beautiful during the summer. Anyway, one of my favorite things to do was simply get in the car and start driving. Any direction, it didn't matter. I just wanted to see beauty of the land, and I was never disappointed. One day, I started driving, again randomly, but this time I thought I ought to go south, out of town, on Sanborn Avenue. It just felt like the thing to do, but really, that wasn't the unusual as I routinely took Sanborn. It's just that this time I had a stronger feeling that I really ought to go that way. I drove for a number of miles until I came to the White River Dam. There's a little parking lot there for canoers and kayakers. I thought I really want to park over there. I really do. So I pulled the car over, got out and looked around. I was overcome with this urge to walk around the edge of the lake above the dam. I realized that whatever it was that I'd been driving towards was there. By now I'm totally perplexed and a little frightened of what I'm going towards, but I feel a push that is making me go forward. I keep going. The edge of the lake isn't a hard line between solid land and water. There's a significant marshy area, and my feet started getting a little wet as I splashed through the water. But I knew I was close. Close to what, I wasn't sure, but I knew it was close. I came to a little bend in the trail I'd been following. Looking, I realized that whatever it was on the other side. Before I go on, I need to describe something about the feeling I was having. I don't know if I'm the only person who had this or not, but I remember when I was younger and pretty inexperienced sexually, if there was the prospect of something significant happening with a girl, I would get a unique feeling of excitement and nervousness, combined with a feeling of doing something that might get me in trouble. I'm talking really inexperienced. Maybe it's just me that had that, maybe not, but that was the feeling I was having then. I was very obviously following something that was manipulating that part of my brain. I generally liked that feeling when I used to get it, usually because it meant that there was something good in the immediate future. But now, walking through a marsh after feeling like something was calling me there from miles away, well, I was freaked out. But still, I thought I should at least see where this feeling led me. I went around the corner and thought, there it is. I looked and there was a thick magazine on the ground. I leaned down and opened it up, and it was full of nothing but lesbian porn. I picked it up, flipped through a page or two, then looked around for anything else. And that's when I realized that the feeling of being pushed was gone. In fact, all of the sensations I've been having since I started driving were gone. It was just me standing in the North Woods with a magazine full of lesbian porn. The magazine had been partially submerged in water and had mud on it, so I just left it there and drove home. I know this sounds like a joke story, but I swear this is something that happened to me. I'd never had that feeling of being pushed ever before, and I've never had it again. Skeptics of Reddit, what's something you have seen that you cannot explain? I was hiking in Yosemite, and one night while stargazing, I saw a light that slowly moved across the sky in a reasonably straight line. I thought it was a satellite, as those are incredibly common when you get out into the places that show the night sky clearly. The light then stopped, and started moving in every direction in these erratic jumps and bursts of speed. It did this for maybe 20 minutes before it started moving in its original direction. I've never seen anything like it before or since. Shooting stars or satellites don't just stop and zip around in random directions like that. It couldn't have been a drone because it seemed to be too high and you couldn't hear anything. And besides, most drones can't move like that anyway. Everyone in our group saw it, but we didn't really talk about it much, other than my buddy referring to it as the drunk driving alien. I don't know what it was, but I've seen nothing like it before or since. When I was young and single, a few friends and I went camping in a Utah desert. A couple of us decided to sleep under the stars. This was a location that is far from any light pollution, and the skies were clear enough to see the bright, rich Milky Way. I woke up in the middle of the night, and my eyes opened to a massive image of a lion's head with a flowing mane made out of stars and nebula. This wasn't some connect-the-dots constellation. It looked more like one of those velvet paintings with a black background but vivid foreground, colors, and sharp, rich detail. The lion head took up most of the sky. It was that big. I was afraid it would go away, so I stared at it as long as I could with looking in any other direction. Eventually, I started experimenting a bit to see if I was lucid. I looked around at the tents, my friends, and the cars. In my mind, I walked myself through the previous night and how everything was exactly where I remember it when we set it up. I read the license plate number on my car. I rubbed my eyes and looked up again. The lion was just as clear as it was before, and even more so because I was waking up even more. At one point, I even woke up a friend of mine and pointed it out to her. Half asleep, she said, "Yeah, that's amazing." At the time, I assumed she meant the lion, but now I see she could have meant just the stars. The whole thing lasted about an hour before I decided to go back to sleep. I didn't feel like any particular special meaning was behind the experience other than the fact that it was beautiful. I didn't have any special affinity towards lions at the time. The experience didn't lead me to take some new path in life. It just happened and I saw it. It could have been a dream, but I really don't think it was. And even if it was, my psyche couldn't have come up with that type of thing. I was 14 and vacationing with my family on a beach in Eastern Europe. Our balcony had a view of the beach and I would sit out there every night. One night, there was a man and a woman walking on the beach. She would walk a few paces and then he would catch up to her, except for she wasn't really walking like a human, but more like a horse, if that makes sense. She would raise her knee, extend her leg, toes pointed, and then gracefully plop her foot down on the ground. She was super thin and looked bald. She also looked like a human mannequin made out of fabric and stitched up. He was watching her walk and almost studying her. She would walk 5 to 10 steps and then robotically turn around and walk the other way. The only plausible explanation I can fathom is that she was some sort of robot sex doll, etc., but her movements seemed too fluid to be a robot and too robotic to be a human. Since then, I've tried researching different illnesses, maybe she was sick, and looked at photos of the newest robots and no dice. I have no idea what I saw. I'm a skeptic of basically everything, but my mom actually has a story about me as a kid she always tells that scares the hell out of people. When I was 3, her aunt died, who she was very close to, Ida. A few months later, her friends took her to a psychic as a birthday gag. The psychic told her not to worry about herself or me because a woman who was like a mother to her and who had died was watching over both of us. It freaked her out, but she ignored it. A few months later, she was walking to bed past my bedroom door, which was open a little. She heard talking and she looked in. I was sitting at the end of my bed, staring at the wall, having a conversation in the dark. She turned the light on and shook me and asked me what I was doing and who I was talking to. I told her that I had just been at Ida's house and we were eating cheesecake and playing Hi-Ho Cherry-O, both my mom's favorite. I've never been to Ida's house, and I was 3 and didn't know what those things were, and we lived across the street from a giant cemetery, and that's where Ida was buried. Me and my girlfriend stayed at a very old hotel in Boston recently. I was going to take a picture of the staircase as we were staying on the top floor, and it looked like a cool shot. Instead, I realized it was on video and immediately stopped it after 1 second. I didn't think anything of it, but I went to play it the other day, and there is a voice that says, "Are you taking a picture of me?" No one else was in the staircase. It's neither of our voices, and it absolutely freaked us out. I went for my after-work run one night around 11 p.m. back in 2010 in my neighborhood. I was 18 and just about out of high school. I was headed home, and I felt this weird buzzing electricity in my body. You know that feeling when the hair on your body just stands up and you get cold chills? This weird feeling of fear draped over me, and I, for some reason, thought I needed to stop to shake it out. Thought maybe I was just starting to feel tired or just something. As I stood there, getting my bearings straight and removing my headphones, I was caught off guard by some sort of movement in front of me. I turned my eyes and I watched as a green orb, about 20 to 25 feet away, came up out of the ground, almost like it had been in the earth and just moved up out of the ground effortlessly. It whirled around for about 5 to 6 seconds, like it was getting a view of the area. I immediately became petrified. I'd never encountered anything otherworldly or supernatural-like in my life. I watched this thing shoot off like some sort of rocket, but faster, like lightning. I don't know how to describe how fast it went, but it shot into some trees a ways off. It was still out there, but was pulsating light in these trees. I ran home as fast as I humanly could, walked in the door, and parents said, "You're so flushed, it looks like you've seen a ghost or something." I immediately burst into tears from all the fear that was bottled up. I'll never forget that. My friends and I camped out in this abandoned island off the coast of my country once. The history is that British soldiers used to be based on this island during the age of imperialism, and no one ever lived there again because they said either the souls of the British soldiers dwelled or the place is inhabited by jinn, Arabic for genies, sort of the Islamic ghost. Anyway, we camped there when my friend went to go pee. He came running back, freaking out, saying he saw something. Keep in mind, we were the only people on the whole island as it was uninhabited. Later on, I needed to pee myself, so I went to a different secluded part and saw this shape. It was the silhouette of a very big cat. Feeling scared, I finished off and went back to my group and asked if there are any animals known to live there. Everyone was adamant that nothing could survive on this island, and our region as a whole doesn't have that much wildlife. The next morning, we went to inspect the rest of the island. It's not big, about a mile in diameter. We couldn't find any evidence of anything living there amongst the ruins. Still freaks me out to this day. I was staying the night at a friend's aunt's house, and I made the mistake of watching my first horror movie, Saw. It took a while to fall asleep, but then I had this terrible nightmare. I was conscious and walking around, but felt like I was in a nightmare being hunted. I had my eyes open and was walking all around the house with this extreme sense of being haunted and pending doom. I've not heard of anyone else having this type of nightmare. From my research, it seems like sleep paralysis without the paralysis part. I was out on my boat with my dad, coming back from an island for lunch. There's this lighthouse really far away on a huge rock that sticks out and would ruin ships, and they were getting ready to do construction on it and to replace the current bulb with a solar-powered LED one to save money. Nobody was out there at this point in time. We were close enough to it that we could see the features of the rock and lighthouse, but also relatively far away. I looked to the left of it, and there's this dark black square. I started thinking, fuck, I'm so tired. And then asked my dad if he can see that black square. He said yes. I was super confused and freaked. It was a bright, sunny day, and the square was half the size of this already huge lighthouse. I thought to myself it was surely some scaffolding tarp that had been caught in the wind. But the thing didn't flap and stood perfectly still. It got thinner and thinner, and then poof, vanished. I still have no idea what the fuck it was. There was this time when I was young. My parents took me into the underground city in Edinburgh for a tour. The tour guide was giving the "don't get lost or we'll never find you" spiel. As he was doing it, I saw something walk out of a corridor behind him. I'm gonna save text here, because I could go all melodramatic and wax lyrical about it for ages. It was basically what we'd now call a Grim Reaper. Skeletal head and hands, carrying an hourglass in the hand I could see, with what looked like smoke or shadows around it for clothes. No one else even twitched. When I was clear that no one else was seeing this thing in the corridor, I freaked out to the point my parents had to take us off the tour. The thing that still makes my skin crawl about that, I didn't have my love of sci-fi, fantasy, or actual science when I was that young. I didn't really get that until I read The Hobbit a year later, so I didn't know what a Grim Reaper was. I didn't know the anatomy of a human's hand bones, or the association of the hourglass with death. Yet, I saw all those things, and some of my drawings from that age have details I wouldn't have known at that age, like the fact that the carpus at the base of the hand being 7 bones in a cluster, not a single knob of bone. Been over 20 years, and I've still not quite figured out how I knew things like that for those drawings. If I didn't know better, I'd think it'd been the victim of a practical joke, but I freaked out enough that there's no way my parents would have kept it going. It was an average day. I saw a spider on the wall and I killed it with a slipper. The second the slipper crushed it, I got this sudden feeling of dread, like I had somehow chosen a different path in a choose-your-own-adventure story that would snowball into something else. Just as fast as the feeling came, it was gone a second or two later. I still don't know what caused it. It's not like I haven't killed spiders before, and that was the only time in my life I have ever felt like that. Not even the few near-death moments I've had were like it. I felt weirdly aware of my own existence in a way similar to an astronaut looking down at Earth from space. It has left me a little perplexed. I know it was my brain glitching in some way, but it was still very odd, to say the least. Not seen, but heard. An old house I rented was the home to a former whiskey maker and county-wide notorious a-hole. One night, about 3 to 4 a.m., I heard what sounded like an old-time radio show, like a trio or duo of women singing old gospel-style music, then an announcer speaking with them, all in that old-time Midwestern meter. I searched the house but could find nothing. I bailed and slept at a friend's. A few nights later, several friends were over for a party, and by around 3 a.m. it had died down. We were just vegging in the living room. One of my friends just asked, "Does anyone else hear that old radio?" He described hearing practically the same thing I heard previously. I didn't stay at this house long. We were playing hide and seek in the dark one night after the power went out. I was hiding behind some shit in the laundry room, but I just remember seeing the front of the dryer start to glow a bright purple color. The light seemed to be coming from across the hall in my bedroom, which couldn't have possibly created that phenomenon. After a lot of pondering, I've come to the conclusion that it must have been St. Elmo's fire, but that shit still seems whack. A while ago, I took a road trip to the southwest United States. I was in northern Arizona near the border of New Mexico on some back roads outside a reservation looking for a place to park and camp for the night. The sun had just gone down and it was getting dark quickly. There was still a band of light across the horizon from the setting sun. I came across a deer that appeared to be hit by a large vehicle, a semi or box truck or something like that. There was flesh and bits of fur in the road and blood stains spiraling across the road that led to a fresh deer carcass on the shoulder. It looked gruesome. Naturally, I slowed down and rubbernecked. The deer was still alive and looked into the headlights. As I pass it, I swear it sits up straight like someone getting out of bed and starts to stand on its back legs. I punched the gas and didn't slow down until I got to Flagstaff. Fuck that. Alright. So I thought about making this after my mom told me about my dad's encounter with something out in the woods. For reference, I live in Wisconsin and very close to Lake Michigan. So the story goes, when my dad was 16, he was playing baseball out behind his other father's house. His parents are divorced, just throwing the ball in the air and hitting it. He ends up smacking the baseball into the deep woods and goes to retrieve it. He gets about halfway to the ball when he feels this tingling. Asking him about this, he commented that he has never been this scared in his life. He felt like something was breathing down his neck, looming over him. This presence freaks him out so bad that he takes the baseball bat and swings as he turns and hits whatever it was in its side. The thing lets out a screech so loud and unnatural that my grandmother hears it from the porch where she sits most days. He barely sees it, and with how fast it was, but he said it looked human but tall and black, with long spindly limbs. He ran back home, the bat broken in two with how hard he hit it, screaming like he was being murdered and ran inside, frantically explaining that he just hit something. To this day, he doesn't know what it was, but he avoids that forest to this day. When I was about 10 years old, I had recently gotten home from school and for some reason was the only person in my family home at the time. I heard my dog barking like crazy outside, so I went to the window to see what was up. That's when I saw a gorilla-looking thing right in our yard. We don't have gorillas around here, though, so I didn't know what the fuck it was. It scared me so much that I called my dad. While I was on the phone with him, the animal turned towards my direction. It felt like it was looking at me, and I started panicking. My dad told me to go downstairs and lock the door, like that was gonna help. By the time I got back to the window, the thing was gone. I was a smart kid and knew my animals, and it didn't look like any I'd seen before. After it happened, I even checked out a bunch of books from the library on mammals. I couldn't find anything that looked similar, other than books on Bigfoot and Sasquatch. I don't believe in either, but that day still bothers me. The fear I felt when I saw that thing was real. I was shaking from head to toe. My family thinks I saw a dog or something, but this thing was like 10 to 15 feet from me, and I saw it in broad daylight. It was walking on 4 feet like a gorilla, stood up and started walking on 2 feet, and turned around and looked straight at me. The only thing that really gives me comfort that I wasn't just imagining it is the fact that my dog saw it. For she never barked like that, and she was going crazy. After all these years, I've narrowed it down to A, for some reason a gorilla was in my neighborhood in East Tennessee, B, it was a black bear that looked similar to a gorilla facial features, C, it was a person in a Bigfoot suit, or D, something like a Bigfoot but isn't, so I don't sound crazy. Hikers of Reddit, what is the weirdest, creepiest thing you've come across while hiking? When we were exploring the Australian outback as university students, my friend and I found an old, tightly wrapped plastic bag with 5 or 6 damaged wallets along shrubbery at the base of a cliff. The only reason we opened it up was because we were so remote, hundreds of kilometers from any town or tourist attraction, that it was strange to see garbage out there. All the cards were in female names, and birth dates placed them in their late teens to early 20s. Some lived in the Northern Territory, but one was in Sydney and another from Queensland. At the time, we figured rock climbers must have stored their valuables in the bag and then lost track of it. I'll never forget the strange look the police officer gave us when we handed them in. I was backpacking with a few friends. A few days in the middle of nowhere, a man approached our camp as we were cooking dinner to say hi. We talked about our routes for a few minutes. Out of nowhere, he told us that he had a vasectomy in his 30s after his second child. Then, somehow his wife had gotten pregnant with his third child. He didn't believe this was possible, so he demanded a DNA test to see if he was actually the father. He was. Still, he explained that he had his doubts and thought that his wife must have fixed the DNA test. My friends and I were in our 20s and had no idea why this guy was telling us this. We all just nodded and smiled. The man stopped talking and then just walked away into the night. I was in the woods with 3 friends at night. A friend's house was nearby and I was getting hungry, so I went inside to find some food. Another friend came inside with me. 2 friends were still outside. Later on, one of the 2 who were outside comes in and sees the indoor friend on the couch next to me. They panic and immediately run back outside. I poke my head out the door asking what's going on, only to hear them yell as loudly as they can, "That's not Kevin!" Everyone comes inside and calms down a bit, and the story comes out. They thought the friend who was indoors with me, Kevin, had been outside with them this entire time. Why? Because in the darkness of the woods, they saw a silhouette about the same height walking alongside them silently. Then, at some point it ran away, and they were chasing it, thinking Kevin was running off for some reason. The reason my friend yelled, "That's not Kevin!" was to stop the last outdoor friend from chasing whoever was out there deeper into the woods. We still have no idea who that was or why they didn't ever speak. Last October, I went on a long weekend kayak camping trip up in the Adirondacks. It's a very calm, slow-flow river, no rapids, just smooth water. This is the second year I've gone with my parents' partner. It's usually 2 to 3 kids, age 3 to 8, and 5 to 7 adults. We kayak in about 10-ish miles and camp in the middle of nowhere, and it's awesome. We go late in the season because it fits everyone's schedule, but also because very few people are out that time of year. The overnight temps hover around freezing, but the days are fairly warm. There are campsites set up along the way, and there are a couple of sections of private land without campsites. There is a section of the river that is really shallow and muddy and usually requires someone to get out and pull the other kayaks through some mud. It's annoying, but no big deal. We come to this section, and I get out to help guide kayaks through. I was just looking around appreciating the view and I noticed two people in camouflage sitting on the hill watching us. A little weird, there isn't hunting allowed in this area, and there are no legal campsites nearby, as that 2 to 3 mile section traverses private land. I pointed out the people to some other folks in my group, and they also thought it was weird, and have been up to that area way more than I have. But there's nothing to be done about it, so we just moved through the section. As we were leaving, I looked back and noticed the people weren't there anymore. We set up camp a few miles down from that section. It's very quiet this time of year. No birds are around. Some small animals, squirrels, and chipmunks are around, but that's about it. It wasn't quite fully dark, and we're standing around the fire and just doing camp things when we hear what sounds like a human impersonating an owl. Whoo! Whoo! Down by the water. Everyone who saw the people earlier get dead silent and tell the kids to shut up. We heard some splashing, but it sounded like it was further out in the middle of the river, not too near us. We all grabbed whatever weapon we had, which was minimal, a fixed blade knife, a hatchet, stuff like that. Someone headed down to the riverbank to investigate. I followed and we saw nothing, not even ripples in the water. I have no idea what we were hearing, but we were all on edge that night for sure. We didn't see anyone else the entire time we were out there, and we definitely didn't hear any birds or animals either. When I was 10, we were hiking on a zigzag road in the mountains. We looked down at a hole in the fence and we saw a car 20 meters or 65 feet below on its roof. We had to go further down, so we were going to pass that car anyway. Although the accident had happened a day earlier and there was no one left in it, it was still an impressive experience that I still think back on regularly. We read in the newspaper afterwards that it was a family with 4 people and nobody survived. I've told this story before, but on an old account. We called them the tar pits. Deep in the woods here in rural Ohio where I live, there were these extremely deep ruts caused by generations of tractors driving through the same rough spots, collecting maple tap buckets, harvesting timber, etc. This one small area had ruts about 2 feet deep, and they were filled with this mystery substance. It was like some kind of melted purple taffy with green specks in it. I assume it is something like the leaves falling into it forever and the life getting sucked out of them into this misery pit. The shit was like quicksand. Locals used to drive quads and customize 4x4s around that area all the time. If someone got stuck, it legit took hooking chains to an excavator arm or bulldozer to pull them out, which normally did a lot of damage to their vehicles. One summer, we had an awful drought, and the tar pits dried up. At the bottom was basically a giant pile of bones. It was all animals that got into the stuff and couldn't get out. Dead deer, possums, raccoons, etc. Call us stupid hillbillies, but we loaded up the bones and buried them in a big hole elsewhere. Was hiking with my husband. We were in a somewhat popular area, but there was no one out there that day. We had decided to do a 5-mile loop that day in a heavily wooded area. We were more than halfway to a bridge that takes you over the river when we started hearing twigs snapping along the side of us. We were closer to the bridge than to our car, so we picked up our pace and started making a bunch of noise to scare whatever it was. I noticed as we got closer to the bridge that I couldn't hear any birds, so whatever it was still close. We rushed across the bridge before stopping for water. We could hear birds over there. We finished the hike as quickly as we could, but didn't hear anything weird the rest of the way. We know it was an animal following us, but we're not entirely sure what it was. Mountain lions are common in the area, so it's possible it was a big cat. I was hiking in Washington sometime in December. I was trying to make my way across a river, but the bridge was out. I was walking along the shore looking for a shallow spot, but couldn't find one. I saw some footprints leading down the bank. My thought was that someone was trying to do what I was doing and decided to track the prints to see if they crossed. It was not easy, but I followed the prints for about a mile. As I approached what looked like a crossing, I heard a loud bang, like a stick hitting a tree. I froze for a few seconds and heard no other noises. I just slowly back up, keeping my eyes on the other side of the river. Could not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Got the hell out of there as quick as I could. In the 80s, my parents were backpacking in western Nevada in the middle of nowhere and came across some guys in an SUV. The guys didn't see them at first and pulled a younger guy, late teens or early 20s, out of the car and started walking down a path into the thick brush. Again, this was strange because this was way out there. They noticed my parents at this point and gave them a look that just screamed, "Get the fuck out of here, now." So they did. They were nervous to say anything, but decided it was the right thing to do to report the incident. Nothing really came of it. Fast forward 20 years, and in 2015, a detective contacts them both about the incident, and they all meet up. Turns out, these guys were part of a big-time gang at the time, and they killed the kid and buried his body out there. Somebody had discovered the body or something like that, so they reopened the case. The creepiest part, my dad and I went hiking there in 2014, a year earlier, to the exact spot this happened. We very well could have been standing right over the dude's body and didn't even realize it. Not really weird or creepy, but the most scared I've ever been. Hiking the Grand Canyon with my buddy, we were hiking through a very narrow part of the trail with a big drop-off next to us. I was in front and all of a sudden, I hear him scream bloody murder. My first thought was he slipped and fell. I turned around and he's quickly walking backwards. That's when I see the coiled up rattlesnake that I just walked over. He was stretched out on the tail, basking in the sun and coiled up when I stepped over it. I don't know if I thought it was a stick or if I straight up didn't see it and got lucky. Either way, I consider myself very lucky, and I'm glad my friend was observant enough to see it before it was too late. Decided to extend a hike I've done many times before to see an old firewatch tower. Misread my map, though it was 5 miles to the tower and back. Turned out to be 5 miles one way. Was woefully unprepared. Ran out of water after reaching the tower, middle of August. Not good. Heading back from the tower and I started getting dizzy. Laid down on a boulder for a quick rest. Ended up falling asleep. Woke up close to dark, started walking back, and in my exhausted, dehydrated state, wandered off trail. A few seconds after I realize I'm off the trail, a big brown dog comes up to me out of nowhere. No tag or collar. Lets me pet it and then starts walking off. Figure people take their dogs hiking all the time. It's probably headed back to its owner. Followed the dog for what seemed like a very long time. Stepped back onto the trail at the exact point where I decided to extend my hike. Doggo looks at me, walks around a big tree, and either moves into the dark or vanishes. No clue if it was a real dog or I was dehydrated to the point of hallucination, but thank you, spirit dog, for saving me from a really shitty night in the woods. 2 friends and I were hiking a 3-day portion of the Ozark Highlands Trail in Arkansas. We went in December, so the weather was great, but it was leaf-off season, meaning that all the trees had gone dormant for the winter and shed their leaves. The OHT is marked by volunteers with white paint stripes on trees. Unfortunately, what we quickly realized when we started the trail is that winter in the Ozarks, everything is gray. The trees are gray-brown, and the trail markers are nearly invisible. The trail itself, due to leaf-off, is completely covered by a thick layer of dead leaves, making the path totally obscure and difficult to follow. We were amateur hikers, hoping to make it 8 miles per day. On the first day, we got lost so many times that we hiked about 15 miles and never made it to our planned overnight location. Later in the day, as the shadows began to lengthen, we realized that we had deviated from the trail yet again. We had come upon a road of sorts, made of bumpy bricks placed together with deep gaps between each brick. It must have been an old setter's road for the pioneering days of the Ozarks. After checking our GPS, we saw that the road would eventually come within 100 feet of the trail. We followed the road as long as we could, but it became thick with brambles, and we cut through the woods uphill towards what we thought the OHT would be. As we traveled uphill, we stopped for water and to check the GPS. The sun had dropped below the horizon, and it was about 30 minutes until darkness set in. The trees were gray and thick as mist in this desolate part of the forest. The GPS indicated that the trail was due west of our position, so we picked up our packs and planned to camp as soon as we met the trail. Immediately upon heading west, we came across an ancient-looking handmade rock wall fence. Inside, the fence were many protruding rocks, some of them with hand-carved inscriptions set into the stone. They were gravestones, marked with dark gray and worn with age. No path led directly to the graveyard, and there were no signs of people in the graveyard itself. We were exhausted. We had blisters on our feet. We were in extremely low spirits that our adventure had gotten so detailed, and just wanted to rest for the night. But when I say that we got as far away as fast as we could from that abandoned pioneer cemetery in the dark of night, I mean it. Later, I found out it was Jones Cemetery, a settler cemetery just like I thought, and it is right next to the damn Ozark Highlands Trail. girlfriend and her friends were spending the weekend near a lake in the Uintas, a remote range in Utah. Near to or shortly after dusk, the girls started hearing a strange noise and eventually caught a glimpse of what appeared to be a person attempting to duck behind a bush or a tree as if to hide. They quickly got the hell out of Dodge, but left all of their gear and tent in haste. They returned the following morning with one of the girls' fathers and discovered a large shoe print in the tent, too large to be any of the girls. They were noticeably shaken by the encounter. Me and a few of my friends like to plan road trips to different states where we do hiking, usually involving cool ruins or abandoned places if we can find some worth checking out. Late last December, we hit New Jersey to check out the Pine Barrens since there's a lot of cool local urban legends surrounding that area. We figured it would be cool to save one of the ruin hikes for nighttime just to up the spooky factor. So, anyways, for the place we went to, you basically have to park on the side of the road and hike maybe a quarter mile into the woods across some train tracks to get to the ruins. We do that and approach the train tracks. The first thing we see when we're beginning to walk up across the tracks in the dead of night is a fresh deer carcass that had been deliberately placed there and spray painted with all kinds of symbols. We eventually chalked it up to some local teens playing a prank with roadkill, but it was creepy as shit. It definitely didn't help that the Brooksbury brick factory already has a dark history surrounding it. What is the most disturbing true crime story you know? Not safe for work. Just got done reading Bodies and Barrels, the Snowtown Murders. Long story short, John Bunting, and with the help of a few friends, tortured, killed, and dismembered 11 people, putting their bodies in large plastic barrels and keeping them for years. By the end, he had run out of room for them, so he rented an old bank and stored the barrels in the vault. John Bunting had no sense of smell, so he got caught when the stench eventually got so bad it permeated throughout the vault and neighbors complained. Apparently, he enjoyed stirring up the decomposing human soup. I left out a lot of details, but you should totally read the book. It's pretty good and pretty fucked up. Mary Vincent, total badass but horrifying survival story. Mary was 15 years old, I think, hitchhiking in California, hoping to get back home. Picked up by a POS who then raped her and cut off both of her arms and shoved her down a cliff. Mary fucking shoved her cut off arms into the mud to stop them from bleeding and hiked for hours and miles to the freeway. Way more to the story, but that is the basics. Mary is a warrior. The greatest serial killer from Brazil, Pedrinho Matador, allegedly murdered more than 100 people, 47 of them while in jail. One of them was, for example, his own father that was also arrested for killing his mother. He also ate his father's heart at the occasion. Once he was in the cell with another murderer, famous for raping his cellmate. Pedrinho, afraid of being raped, killed a guy on the first day. I don't remember the name, but I listened to a podcast about a hitchhiker getting kidnapped, but she managed to escape, and the police would not believe she got kidnapped. Finally, they pick up the guy on an unrelated charge, and he just starts confessing. Turns out not only did he kidnap her, he had murdered a number of people, but with no consistent style, so no one had ever linked the murders. It really makes you wonder if there's prolific serial killers out there that just don't follow any patterns. The murder of Jamie Bulger, a 2-year-old boy from Kirkby, Merseyside, England, who was abducted, tortured, and killed by 2 10-year-old boys, Robert Thompson and John Venables, on Friday, 12 February 1993. They both got off lightly, as well as Venables was repeatedly arrested later in life for CP charges. It is an offense in the UK to own or share a picture of these two or reveal any information about them. My mom tells a story about her aunt and uncle having their home invaded. So it was a group of guys who'd escaped prison and were high and trying to hide out. They also wanted money to get more drugs, supposedly. They broke into their house and duct taped them to chairs, then pumped them full of drugs. My great uncle escaped but couldn't get his wife out of their burning home, so she probably wasn't dead when the fire started, and probably just couldn't escape like my great uncle did. He was horribly disfigured from the fire and obviously mentally scarred by not being able to rescue his wife from the fire. I cannot find articles about the incident as it happened in a small town back in 1994, but if anyone knows about a prison break in 94, in rural New Mexico, then it's potentially connected. The guy who did it and got out of prison was in a video about a rehabilitation job where ex-cons sell donuts. My mom saw him and started freaking out, rightfully, which is why I heard the story the first time. I think as it's a pretty fucked up true crime story, that hits close to home. I also can't remember the video where the one dude got out of prison, but if I shared that video, his name wouldn't be attached to the story, and I don't feel comfortable doing that anyway. There was a case that was the opposite of Ken McElroy, the bully who got murdered in front of dozens of witnesses and no one saw anything. The case involved several bullies who targeted two brothers constantly and ended with them kidnapping them and beating them in front of witnesses. That escalated to them being tied up, tossed in the back of a pickup truck, and paraded around town before they were eventually shot. None of the witnesses called the police, even though the final incident went on for several days. If by true crime you mean like a crime that happened, a few years ago I worked at a call center and one guy on my team who was probably 40-ish started talking to me and the other guys who were all early 20s about Call of Duty. Well, turns out he and I both are into guns too. I'm like, hell yeah, I just made a friend. So he invites me to his house to shoot one day. And like, we kicked it, man, just had a friendly day. So a few weeks of working together, he asks where I live. And when I tell him, he tells me his parents used to live down the street. I asked if they moved, and he deadass tells me this story, his perspective. My parents lived about a mile or two down from you. They didn't move. What happened was my sister and her boyfriend wanted money. So they killed my mother in her sleep and waited for my father to come home and shot and killed him. They tried to bury one and burn the other, but were unsuccessful and got caught. My sister is actually up for parole next year, but her boyfriend is doing life. They had an episode of some A&E crime show on it a few years ago when it happened. Holy shit, yo. I was weirded the fuck out at that. Viola Liuzzo. She was a Michigan housewife who believed strongly in the civil rights movement. She left her family to march on Selma and shuttle African Americans to protests and the polls. She was murdered by a carload of KKK members for betraying the race, one of which turned out to be an FBI informant. In order to shield the informant from guilt, the FBI spent the next 20 years putting out misinformation about her case and her death, going as far as to call her a prostitute, drug addict, and even a communist in the middle of the Red Scare. In reality, she was a devout Catholic and mother of 5 who had the audacity to think that equality was something worth fighting for. Some of you may have heard about this one. My criminal justice professor was a sheriff's deputy for 27 years. One day, he told us about the last case he ever worked as a homicide detective. It was so emotionally traumatic for him that he physically couldn't continue investigating homicides after the investigation concluded, and he went back to being a patrol officer for the remainder of his career. He was working in a smaller area in Arizona. A couple hundred miles away in New Mexico, a teenager about to graduate high school and the first of his family to be accepted into college went missing. His family filed a missing persons report that night after calling all of his friends and searching his local hangout places. While retracing the route he was supposed to have taken, the local police found that a gas station security camera had captured footage of him being forced into the trunk of a car by 3 armed men. The officers were able to get a make and model of the vehicle, but having been the mid-90s, the camera quality wasn't good enough to get a license plate. A few days later, somebody found a body in the woods near the town where my professor was working. When he arrived on scene, he almost threw up. According to the coroner's report, they'd sawed the kid's hands and feet off while he was alive. They then cut his stomach open, disemboweled him, poured gas all over his body, and set him on fire. According to my professor, there was evidence that he hadn't died until the flames had gone out, as he dragged himself away from the spot where he'd been set on fire, and the snow around the spot where he was found wasn't melted. As the crime had happened across state lines, he worked in conjunction with both the New Mexico local police and the FBI. The investigators involved had drawn straws to see who had to be the liaison with the family, and my professor drew the short one. He said that was the hardest part of the investigation was to repeatedly fly to New Mexico and personally update the family, only to tell the boy's mother that she couldn't even bury her son yet, because they didn't want to risk losing any evidence on or in the body. They'd found DNA, saliva from a crack pipe that was found under a tree a few dozen yards from the body, fingerprints also from the pipe, and tire tracks in the mud, and a few months later, they finally got results for the DNA. They found one of the guys in his house with a meth lab in the garage, and another one sleeping in a trailer out back. They were both drugged out of their minds. They found the hacksaw that they'd used to dismember the kid still covered in his blood in the trunk of the car, which matched the tire tracks, along with 4 guns and about 15 pounds of meth and crack. When they were interviewed, they said that they didn't even remember what they did with the kid after they were kidnapping him. They asked where the third man was, and all they would say is that the police wouldn't find him. All they said is that they were still selling meth in New Mexico, saw him, and grabbed him. They couldn't explain their reasoning. That night, one hung himself in his cell with his shirt, and the other chewed out the veins in his wrist a week later. They never found the third guy. There was DNA in the car that didn't match the other 2, but there wasn't a match in the federal database, which was still in relatively early stages at that point. As soon as that case was done with, my professor transferred out of homicide. Peter Scully. He is an Australian who fled to the Philippines and operated a secret dark web child pornography website known as No Limits Fun, NLF, where he and others raped and murdered children and babies. They produced videos such as Daisy's Destruction, which is so extreme that it was for some time regarded as an urban legend. It features the torture and brutal rape of a number of girls by Scully and some Filipino accomplices. The 3 main victims were Liza, age 12, Cindy, 11, and Daisy, 18 months. Margaret Aculo, then project coordinator for the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime and an expert on child abuse investigations, described the case as horrific and the worst she'd ever heard of. His crimes were deemed so severe that some prosecutors supported the reintroduction of the death penalty as punishment for Scully, despite the fact capital punishment had been abolished in the Philippines since 2006. It still gives me the chills just thinking about it. I was a mail clerk at a military criminal investigations headquarters. We got cases and case files from air bases from all over. It was a boring job, and we would read the cases to pass the time. One came in from the Philippines. An Air Force woman was in town sightseeing, and an Air Force man from her organization met her on the street. He put a gun in her ribs and made her go with him to a hotel. He spent the next couple of days raping her in all possible ways. He used unopened bottles on her, and twice went down on the street and brought back groups of men to have sex with her. There were other things, but they have slipped my mind. He finally took her out, and on the street, she managed to get away and ran to a cop very close by. He got 20 years in prison, and the rumor was he did 3 years, got paroled, and was supposed to have raped and killed. My parents grew up in Colombia during the drug wars of the 80s. My dad's brother went out on a first date with a girl, and a few hours later, family realized he didn't come back. The situation in Colombia was so tense at the time, if somebody was late, many people already started to assume the worst. After 2 days of not hearing from him and reporting to the police and getting nothing, my dad decided to drive to this river outside the city where many drug cartels dumped bodies. He found his brother's decomposing body along with the girl he went with. Turns out, a friend of the girl he went with, who was also with them at the date, confessed that the 3 of them got kidnapped by the main girl's jealous ex-boyfriend, who had recently become a member of the cartels. He took them all into the mountains, castrated them all, then shot both my uncle and his date in the head. After that, they dumped their bodies, and somehow the girl they went with got to escape and told the story days later on the news. Sadly, this is one of the hundreds of stories everybody who grew up in Colombia in the 80s knows.
What's the creepiest, scariest thing that you've seen but no one believes you? Part 2. At my old school, every Friday we had a party in the announcement hall and there was music blasting and everything. One day, I and two other dudes saw this old dude with the cheap camera taking photos from outside the glass. We told the leader, but they were like, that's probably the cameraman. The thing was only one cameraman, and that dude was around 18 or 19, and he was in the food section. My mom was driving me home one night when there was a full moon out. As usual, children would stare out the window, thinking it was following me, and all of a sudden, I see the shadow of a man hunched over, walking to the right side of the moon. I had no idea what it was, but it stood there for a long time, until it walked down into a shadow. I told my mom the next day, and she told me this Polish folklore about the man on the moon who was making deals with the devil to gain wisdom, riches, and magic powers. He realized that he would be taken to hell when he died, so he prayed to the Virgin Mary to be saved. When he died, the devil wasn't allowed to take his soul, but he still had to pay his debt, so the devil flew him to the moon and left him stranded there. As a kid, I was shook. As an adult or teen, I still don't know what the fuck was on that moon. I was just sitting here on the sofa watching TV, and suddenly the lighter in front of me on the coffee table flipped over and flipped back on its own. It was in my line of sight the whole time. I saw it happen. I literally said, "What the fuck?" out loud, and picked it up, and there was no reason for it to have done that. Nothing wrong with the lighter, no wind or drought. Nothing else next to it moved, and it wasn't an insect or anything. I'm baffled. I don't remember how I found it. I think iFunny, but I accidentally came across a website that secretly live-streamed people's indoor house cameras. I don't know how they did it, but there were rows and rows of streams, people watching TV, baby monitors, etc. I was completely shocked because I read about these things happening on the dark web, and here I am finding it like it's nothing. I felt guilty by looking at it, got scared, and left. This was 2017, so I probably didn't catch anything from that site. Wish I reported it. This is around the time I was diagnosed with schizophrenia, but I was at my grandparents' house out in the middle of nowhere, and I kept seeing this little girl in the field close by. What makes things worse is that I described what the girl looked like to my late grandmother, and she looked at me absolutely terrified. I had just described her little sister that passed away in the late 40s. Fucked me up to this day. I swear to God I saw Slender Man when I was younger. In my old house, I was in bed, and it just so happened to be 3 a.m. I was told things about 3 a.m. like monsters and stuff, so I got scared and tried to fall back asleep. I got curious and opened my eyes a little bit. What I saw was someone's legs that were really tall. It had long arms and white hands. It also looked like it was wearing a dark gray suit. I was too scared to look up at its faceless face, and I knew it didn't like having people stare at it, so I shut my eyes and was covered in sweat. When I woke up, it was 8 or 9 a.m. I told everyone in the house what I saw last night, but no one believed me. When I was a kid, I used to see trees moving all the time, like getting up and moving, not just swaying in the breeze. Sort of like they'd stand up and start walking. It was super weird, and I could never figure out why nobody else ever saw it happening other than since my mom was usually driving the car at the time. I could understand her not paying attention. As an adult, I figured what I saw was just a combination of normal tree movements and me being half asleep a lot of the time, but who knows. Now, for this one, my mom did believe me, but our apartment management just laughed me off like I was crazy. I saw coyotes in our apartment complex's designated pet area. Scared the absolute shit out of me. I didn't want to go outside for a few days. The coyotes didn't do anything, and they didn't the second time it happened either. They mostly just seemed kind of baffled, but they're wild animals. There were at least 2, and I'm out there in the pitch dark with 2 11-pound dogs, one of which was absolutely ready to go after the coyotes. And then I'm like, oh shit, are these coyotes going to run after me and the dogs when I turn to go inside? There's a whole parking lot to cross, and my only weapon is this flashlight. I make it inside, and for some reason feel the need to run down the hallway, even though the coyotes would have needed a key to get into the building. And if they had a key to get in, we'd have bigger problems. Email the apartment management to just be like, hey, FYI, there were coyotes in the dog area last night, and we've seen and heard coyotes out in the woods before this. So maybe just give an FYI to the other residents. Put a light out there. And management was just like, there are no coyotes in this area. So that's annoying. I'm not sure if other people believe that story. Nobody ever talks to me, but I have enough photos of a coyote taking a nap outside, although I don't have any of them in the pet area. I was traveling to a hotel with my parents when I was about 15 to 16, and it was late at night in the countryside. There was moorland and forests everywhere, and it was pitch black from the lack of any man-made structures. There was one really long and winding road with lots of inclines and sudden declines. It was a scary drive, to be honest. I'd be terrified if I was doing it since there was literally no visibility or signs to where we were going, just forward. But my dad kept us cool. We were on this road for ages, until at some point we start going up a hill, a really big one, and as the lights on the car try to shine upwards, this enormous, and I mean enormous, black thing appeared within about 5 meters of the car. My dad slammed the brakes, and the lights still couldn't shine on the thing due to there being such a steep incline, putting the thing about half a meter above the lights. It was more than likely a deer, but this thing was huge, bigger than any deer I'd ever seen, bulky, and with a huge head, its fur pure black and with piercing yellow eyes. It stared at us for a solid 10 seconds before strutting into the bush off to the side of the road and completely vanishing. The car we were in was a large SUV, and I confidently say we would have come out worse had we hit it. No one I've told has ever believed me when I describe how freakishly huge the thing was or how strange for a deer it looked, but goddamn if it didn't terrify me.
TLDR. A hallucination saved me from injury, potentially life-threatening.
I had a waking fever nightmare. I don't know if it has a scientific name, but it's when you're awake and conscious, unlike sleepwalking, but dreaming at the same time. You would hallucinate sounds and people in real life. I was walking around the house, absolutely terrified of something. I don't remember what it was, but I was so scared that I almost jumped out the window, which was fairly high and facing a pavement. It would have messed me up badly, or even killed me if I landed on my head. I had one foot out the window while looking back at the door, waiting for whatever I'm scared of to show up so I can jump. But I hallucinated my mom coming out of the corner, which immediately calmed me down and snapped me out of my dream state. My mom wasn't home at the time. I was having a dream. It was an innocent little dream, but that's how they usually start. Just a collection of random happenings, but nothing malevolent or scary to them. And then, somewhere along the way, the dream took a darker turn. I cannot remember what happened or what was in the dream, but gradually the character of the dream took on a sinister vibe. Eventually, I found myself completely and utterly oppressed with fear. At some point, unknown entity was there. I have never felt more fear than I had felt at the climax of the dream. It was the most primal, visceral sort of terror you could experience. I was utterly desperate to escape it, and when the fear reached its crescendo, I jolted to being awake. And there it was. The specter that haunted my dream was standing right in front of me. It looked down upon me with such intense malevolence and hatred, it was palpable how much it wanted to hurt me. It lingered there for what felt like an eternity before it started walking around the bed, and then it dematerialized as it did so. I cannot even describe how it looked to you, just as I cannot describe the dream itself. It was like the very idea of fear and hate had coalesced into an entity that wanted nothing more than to hurt me. So as a kid, I never got sleep because I'd stay awake all night because I gotta go to the restroom, but I didn't want to make noise or I just played games. I'm still sleep deprived today, but the point is, as a child I'd always hear noises that today I'm not scared of because I just feel like I can punch whatever the hell there is. All kids get scared. So once, when I was holding my pee and I really had to go, I went. This was at the middle of the night, so everything was dark and my lamp couldn't light up anything past my bed. When I got out of the restroom, I looked behind me. In the kitchen, I saw a dark figure.
A very dark figure.
I can make myself believe it had horns, and that's the scary part. I'm pretty sure I saw horns, and then it looked as if it was looking at me. I was just at my sister's door, which is next to my door. I rushed into my room, which was dark as fuck. I talked out my lamp just to point out how dark it was. I got on my bed and got under my blanket and closed my eyes. It was a nightmare. I was ready for it to stab through my body or flip the blanket. It didn't happen. Some months ago, I found out people sometimes see dark figures, but they don't actually exist, and is just an illusion, is what I think it said. Now I grew this new way of overcoming my nightmares or fears by killing them in my dreams. That's how fucking scary it was. And I watched Jurassic Park as a kid, and I was not haunted at all. Oh, that's not scary. Sure as hell, seeing people die would at least make you shook. So once, like when old Changi Hospital was still open to the public, me and my friends went there to check it out as it was after our O-levels. So, it was only like 8 p.m. at night, but when we got to the canteen, I felt that something was wrong. My friends felt it too, but no one saw anything. Until now, I don't know how it ever happened. When we were walking out of the canteen, I saw a little boy talking to a figure at one of the stalls. He was pointing his finger at the board. Somehow I wasn't freaked out, so I walked closer, but he just disappeared. I never told anyone this. After like 10 more minutes, we walked out of the hospital and took out my phone to get a selfie, the old Nokia phone with the camera sound. So, I took a photo and it was all black. Like nothing was blocking the phone cam, but the pic was black. We freaked out and went home. Anyways, everyone saw the black picture, but no one believed me about the small boy ghost thingy. Still remember it very clearly. When I was like 5, I can't remember, I was camping with my parents. We had a tent at the time instead of the Class C we now have, but I was in the river with all the other kids there. I knew everyone there. But when I was running around, something rolled under my feet. I reached down with my head barely above water and picked up the thing that rolled under my feet. And guess what it turned out to be? A water moccasin. I should point out that I have a fear of snakes. I looked up at the guy I was playing with and I screamed, "Snake!" I've never seen an area cleared so fast. I should mention that they killed the snake the previous day before we got there. The head was blasted off and went downstream with the current, but the body, or the tail, fell to the surface underwater. They went out there and found it. It turned out to be headless. I sat outside the tent, crying for the rest of the day. Everyone who was there that day remembers it and says I ran on water. But if I say this to anyone else, they don't believe me. Now, this may not seem as bizarre as anything else here, but think about it. I was like 5 or something like that, maybe even 3, and I have a huge fear of snakes. Seriously, when my parents showed me Harry Potter and the Chamber of Secrets, that basilisk scared the hell out of me. And this snake is venomous, poisonous, whatever you want to call it. So it was pretty scary for a 3 to 5-year-old me. I saw what I thought was a Wendigo-type creature in the forest where I used to live. I told my parents and they said it was the wind. A couple days later, and my sister had the same idea. Same height, figure, glowing eyes, hunched back. She said it was like a third person as she recalled the state of my room, what I looked like at the time. It was so creepy. When I was 7 or 8, I would have a reoccurring nightmare that one of my dolls came to life, played with me, and then would try to pull me into the closet with her. I'd follow her into the closet at first, but then she'd show me this little door at the back of the closet, and my heart would start to race. I don't know what it was about that door, but I knew something bad would happen if I went through it. I'd start to struggle and try to pull away, but the doll was too strong and would start pulling me through the door. At this point in the dream, I'd always wake up screaming. The worst part was I had night terrors, so sometimes I'd wake up standing next to my closet. Every night before bed, I'd make my parents make sure there wasn't a little door at the back of my closet. There never was. Anyway, I was talking to my mom the other day and this dream came up. I'm laughing about it and how ridiculously paranoid I was about dolls and that closet, but my mom gets really quiet. She tells me the creepy part of that dream wasn't the doll. It was the fact that there used to be a little door at the back of the closet, but when I was 1 year old, they remodeled the house and put a wall where the door used to be. There's no way I could remember that door, but years later, I kept dreaming about it. None of my friends believe this story, but I swear it's true. When I was 10, I was chilling outside at around 10 a.m. on my birthday and was alone, so I was tired and on the edge of falling asleep, and I saw a pure white stag in the distance looking at me. It had pure black eyes, and it was heavily scarred with its horn looking worn and broken. I don't know why, but I got scared, and I couldn't move. It was around 20 feet away from me before I got up from my chair and ran to the backyard door and went inside. All I could hear was slamming on the iron door since I was locked in the garage, tears streaming down my face. It felt like hours staying in the corner with a rusty machete. I was ready to die that day, and then, after what felt like an eternity, it fell silent, and that was when I experienced true fear. I thought to myself, is it gone? Is it going to charge? After that, I heard a clatter of hooves and heard it coming closer. Then the door slammed open, and then my mother came in, and wondered where I'd been. I explained everything, but when we saw the cams, it was nothing. It was as if I was running from nothing. Even the door had no dent, which I looked at in disbelief. Sometimes, when I'm alone, there are many things I think about, but one of the only things that are always on my mind were its eyes, pure black. I moved since then, but that shit was terrifying. If anyone can explain if this is a mental phenomena, can you explain it, please? What was the most fucked up thing you have ever witnessed? I saw a guy attempting to jump a fence. The kind of iron fence with big spikes on stop as a security feature. This poor drunk bastard slips and impales his upper thigh and groin, and before the firefighters could cut him down, he pulled out a fucking gun and shot himself in the head. When I was in grade school, I saw a kid cross the street towards the school. A speeding car hit him and it spun him around. It also caught his side and ripped the skin off of his abdomen, exposing his intestines. He and his sister were trying to keep his intestines in his body. Then, a lady in a Mercedes slammed on her brakes, wrapped the kid in an expensive coat she was wearing, threw him in the back seat, and sped off. I just stood there in shock. The kid lived, but was homeschooled after that. I was near the end of a funeral line driving to a graveside service. We had a long line, so several motorcycle cops were speeding up past us to block intersections ahead. Just as one drove past me at about 40 to 50 miles per hour, some idiot gets impatient and pulls out through our procession. The cop never had time to react and slammed into them straight on at full speed, smashing his bike into bits, and he went flying about 40 feet and knocked into a power pole. The woman idiot who had been driving just kept running and round, screaming, "Oh my God, oh my God, oh my God." I was certain at the time he must be dead, but I read later he spent a lot of time in the ICU and lived. Witnessing an elderly man falling on the pathway, bleeding profusely. I was a kid back then, and my instinct was to run over to him and check on him. For the first couple of minutes, I was so scared he might pass out from the loss of blood, and no passerby was present. I gave him tissues to wipe his blood and asked if he wants to go to a nearby clinic to get his wounds dressed, but he was dazed, and thankfully, 2 ladies came to the rescue and got him to the nearest clinic. Thankfully, he is well, and wounds were dressed. Not as gory as the rest, but when my mom was dying of brain cancer, it affected her emotions and rational thought process. I'm constantly tripping over memories from my childhood that don't make any sense, like spending hours after school every day in the grocery store when we didn't need groceries. It was the dying, though, that really took the cake. Just seeing this person you love and respect, who can no longer take care of themselves, can no longer put together a sentence. It always reminded me of a flashlight with the batteries going bad. She always wholeheartedly believed she was going to get better, had young kids that she wanted to raise. My brother was barely 5 when she died. She was this vibrant person until she just wasn't. Seeing the look on her face when she realized it was over absolutely killed me. And she was so young, 37. I'm well into my 20s now, and I can imagine. All her kids were under 10. That's just something I can never make sense of. She did her best. If it's ever me that gets sick like that, I'm done. I can't put myself through that like she did. A man on a motorcycle who apparently leaned a bit too far in his turn, wasn't wearing a helmet, and was just covered in blood on half of his face. We were just passing by on the other side of the road. He was already being helped by multiple people, but my God, there was so much blood. Wear your helmets. No idea if he made it or not. I was probably only 7 or 8, and never really thought about it much after that. When my little brother was dying in the hospital, he had been lying there still for days when all of a sudden he raised both arms up in the air. In the process, he was tangling up and pulling all his wires and tubes, so my dad and I tried to keep his arms down, but it was a ridiculous strong resistance. I knew at the time that was the base of his brain dying, but I didn't say anything. I said goodbye and went home. It was 3 a.m., and it was the start of my dad's shift to stay with him. My brother was dead an hour later. I'll never forget rushing back, and all the tubes and wires were gone, and it was so quiet. And you know how in the movies, when you close a dead person's eyes, it doesn't work like that. His eyes were pointed in different directions, wouldn't stay closed. A year or so later, my dad died. One morning, he had a heart attack, and we were trying to get to a hospital. We were in the 3rd floor parking lot of our building, and he said, "I'm going to pass out. I'm passing out." and I grabbed onto him bear hug style, and we were face to face, and he exhaled all of his air in one deep breath, and his face turned purple. He did not fall down. I laid him down. He was dead by the time I got him down on the floor, and then I dragged him back into the elevator and down to the ground floor, where there was a couch and AC. I screamed for someone to call an ambulance, and I tried to give him CPR, but there was vomit in his lungs. I would breathe in and then turn his head away so the exhaled air could push the vomit out. I was fighting through gagging to try to help him, but he died. He lay on the floor for 20 minutes while I tried keeping up with the CPR, but I was getting tired, and it was difficult, and no one was helping me. Everyone just standing there looking at me. When the ambulance finally arrived, they tried for 25 minutes until I asked them to stop. They left, and my dad lay there for another hour while we waited for police to show up. I emptied his pockets and took his jewelry off, a gold chain which I later had to sell. When it was time to move his body into the van, they made me remove the sheet that was covering him, and his eyes were also pointed in different directions, and his tongue was hanging out. Brother was in 2017, Dad was beginning 2019. I think about this every day of my life. Came home from school one day to hear my old cat crying out next to the front door. I went to check on her cause she sounded stressed, and saw that it seemed like she was having trouble moving. There was some blood and I was pretty worried, so I picked her up and knocked on the door to get let in. We always lock it even if someone's home, because the door blows open very easily. Just as someone was coming to open it, the cat's pelvis essentially just exploded, sprayed blood all over my shoes and the front stoop, and almost made me throw up. She was immediately rushed to the vet, and I was told that she was hit by a car down the street and had walked all the way back to lay next to the door. They said she would only have a very low chance of being able to live, even if they did surgery to try and fix her pelvic region, so she had to be put down. I still get chills every time I hear a cat wail like she did, even if I know it's nothing serious. One time, me and my friends snuck out around 3 a.m. We went to this abandoned building by a train to drink Monsters, and I was literally about to confess to them that I liked them. We heard a train coming, so we were hiding so we wouldn't get reported. We were kind of paranoid, lol, but we could still see over this part of the broken down brick wall we were hiding behind, and we saw this drunken-looking, topless, middle-aged woman who was bleeding everywhere jump in front of the train. My friends started crying and having a panic attack, and I just hugged them and tried to comfort them. It was all over the news the next morning, and we turned completely white. Obviously, we couldn't say anything about it. We didn't want to get caught for sneaking out. Plus, there was nothing we could do. They completely forgot about it a couple hours later. They'd been through some trauma, and I guess they went into complete shock. The place was crowded at peak hour, except for this 10-meter radius. I walked over there and there was a homeless person on the ground convulsing, spitting blood. Given the pool of blood and all, he must have been there for 3 minutes, at the least, and nobody from the dozens of people passing around were doing anything about him. I threw my laptop to the ground, immediately checked for the tongue. Apparently it's a misconception we can't swallow it, and looked around for help. I will never forget the people looking at me, at him, with disgust, the embarrassment. My eyes caught the stare of a woman who had just entered a train. I could feel the blank of her mind in that instant. Everyone around her nervously checking their phone, as if everyone just suddenly had an important text. I want you to picture it the way I remember it. Teenager me, trying to do something I've never done before, aka saving a man's life, surrounded by a black sea of indifference which separates me from that person staring at us from the train she's seated in. The doors close on us, taking everyone away as they suddenly lift their chin to look at us. There was never a magic text they all received at the same time. It took 4 minutes for some people to come and assist. The station personnel came after and said, "Oh, I don't understand. Usually he's there and he is okay." Bless her heart, I'll leave it to that. I left the man in better care than my poor skills and went to work. I was terrified, couldn't dry my eyes. My manager sent me home. Years passed. I'm thinking I could have done this or that. I was taught that if you need help, you must point at someone and say, "You with the scarf," otherwise people stay paralyzed too. So yeah, it's nothing gruesome, but it did kill all the hope I had for humankind. Maybe I was just naive and young, but last I checked, the world didn't get any better. The aftermath of a fatal road accident. An elderly woman and her daughter were waiting to cross the road. The mother apparently just casually stepped into the road as if it was clear. She was promptly run over by a lorry that likely wasn't even going that fast due to where the crossing was. A friend knew of someone who had apparently seen the immediate aftermath, and it was practically indescribable how awful the scene was. I was inadvertently walking past after her body had been taken away. I didn't actually find out what happened until I got home, and there was a firefighter hosing not only the blood off the road, but vomit thrown up by witnesses and several first responders. I have witnessed what feels like an inordinate number of motorcycle fatalities. First was a kid trying to race across and split multi-lane highway. He almost made it, but got hit on lane 3 of 4 and went over the car and landed broken with stuff coming out of his ears. Second was an old dude and his old lady going way too fast down a mountain pass. I didn't actually witness it, I guess, but they got a turn or two ahead of me and I caught up to them. The bike was in pieces against the guardrail and they were smeared stains a couple 100 feet long. I could tell it was them from the jackets. It was about the only part that was recognizable. The third was some old lady in a Jeep merging onto a highway, and she merged over a motorcycle. It rolled under her Jeep, off the shoulder, and burst into flames. I used to jog in the mornings in the city I used to live in. Everyone was on their morning commute to work while I would jog, and I worked evenings. In a notoriously very busy traffic area, I witnessed a bicyclist get in a head-on collision with a vehicle. The cyclist was riding on the wrong side of the road. As I ran up to see if he was okay, I immediately saw that he had died on impact. The worst of it was his helmet did little for him, as I could see bits of his brain or skull mixed in with the broken helmet. I called 911 immediately, even though I knew he was gone. The woman who hit him had her kids in the car, and I can't be sure, but I feel like they got a look too. She was in complete shock. I couldn't even get her name. She was frozen with shock. The police came, got my info, and I left. I honestly had blocked that out of my memory until I read the question. Makes me sick to think about. I was staring into the eyes of the girl who hit my car at 70 miles per hour on a freeway in Phoenix, Arizona in 1990 as she realized her neck was broken, and I watched as she died while people were trying to break the windows of her car to get to her. The life flight helicopter that was coming in to land was waved off after they broke the window of her car and were able to check her pulse. But the most fucked up thing about it was the woman who hit her after she had hit me. She had one of the few car phones at the time, and she made 3 calls. She called her lawyer, her husband, and her insurance agent. It was a road crew nearby that called 911. I had to go to court and testify against her a few months later. Once, I was sitting at the park with my girlfriend. A little bit further off, a young couple sat on a bench. I think they were aged somewhere around 14 to 15. Then out of nowhere, the girl, her father, appeared. He was angry and hit the girl right in the face. It was the sound of the slap that actually made me notice them. He screamed that she was a whore and that he forbade her to meet with this boy before. To the boy, he said, "And if I ever see you again with my daughter, you'll get even worse." He then dragged his daughter to the car and drove off. Not me, but my fiancé cries whenever he sees a Dalmatian. They had a neighbor growing up who bred them and would go over all the time to play with the new litters even as they got older. He was so happy to have gotten his license, he went over to play with puppies as a reward. In the yard, there were 8 pups and mom dog all playing, and they heard a car screeching. A drunk person was swerving and drove off the road and plowing over most of the puppies. The driver sped off and left this horrifying scene behind. My fiancé says the looks and sounds they made still haunt him, and how mom dog just ran around her puppies and the owner screaming. He put as many as he could in his new car and drove to any vet he could find and begged for help. Only 2 survived. Went from a great day to shits real quick. Canoeing down a river and past a huge drainage tunnel that came from under a highway. A guy came by in his boat and decided to explore. About 30 yards deep into the tunnel was an overhead drain shaft that ran straight up to a gutter from the highway overhead. The shaft had bent rebar rungs to be used as a ladder to access the drain gutter from underneath. The guy, in his 30s, decided to climb up the algae mold-covered rebar ladder. One of the rebar rungs was rusted out at one side and bent straight up. Dude climbed well past that rung and went almost to the top. Yep, he slipped and fell. On his way down, the jagged, rusty, bent rebar went straight up his groin and eviscerated his whole midsection. It was very time-consuming and challenging to get a rescue squad to him, much less back into an ambulance. When I was around 15-ish, I was on my way to school and was standing at the train station, which was mostly empty. Classes didn't start till 10 that day. Besides me, I think there was only 5 to 6 people there, one of them being this tall, skinny, black-haired woman standing about 10 meters away from me. Looked completely normal, standing there with her purse on her arm and eating something. 5 minutes later, a freight train is about to pass and the usual PSA of "Step back, fast-moving train passing through" rang out. As the train is about to pass, I look in the direction it's coming from and I lock eyes with the woman for just a brief moment. Her face was completely expressionless, almost like a switch had flipped and turned off a facade or something, and then jumped out in front of the train. I'll never forget the sound. I'll never forget what happened to her body. I'll never forget the blood. Went full-on catatonic and don't remember the next few hours until my mom came home. Then I broke down. Didn't sleep properly for months. Years later, and I still get nervous around trains and I can't stand the sight of blood. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? I was driving on the northern part of the ring road in Iceland. Buddies and I were seeing the whole country and it was bad weather in the middle of winter. Roads were closing behind us, so we couldn't turn back. We finally had a clear day ahead of us where we should have been able to drive and prevent being snowed in for a few days. We hit a stretch of road with no gas stations for many miles, and we fill up on gas and go. Along the way, the weather starts declining, and eventually it gets to whiteout conditions. We couldn't stop for fear of being snowed in, so we crawled along at 10 miles an hour. Closest I felt I ever came to dying on a road in the middle of nowhere in Iceland in a blizzard. Great trip though, 10 out of 10, would go back. I stopped at a light in a questionable part of town, and a strange lady hopped into the passenger seat of my car. She told me to drive her to the ATM and get her some money. I told her that I'd forgotten my purse and could not do so. My purse was behind my seat, and I was really hoping she wouldn't look around and catch my lie. She kept insisting that I give her money, and I kept driving and telling her I couldn't. I'm pretty sure the $20 or so I had in the bank would not have been enough anyway. Finally, I saw a cop car stopped on the side of the road. I pulled up behind it and told her she could either get out then or I'd start honking my horn to get the cop's attention. She decided to leave. I was pretty shaken by that. I'm not sure what I would have done if I hadn't seen the cop, and she was getting increasingly insistent, and I know I would not have won a fight with her. Also, she took my bag of gummy worms. Being in a locked bathroom while a fire drill was going off. I was in a halo cast due to having a back surgery, so I couldn't move my head or the middle of my body. I must have been like 5. Being almost paralyzed while that terrible alarm was blaring was terrifying. It felt like imminent doom was approaching, and you're left defenseless. Scarred me the rest of my childhood to even into high school. I had a car accident last Sunday night, lost control and ended up in a culvert where I hit a tree head-on. All airbags deployed, completely destroyed the front end of my subcompact SUV. Managed to get out and crawl up the ditch onto the narrow, dark, 2-lane country road where it was eerily quiet. All in all, a terrifying experience. I worked for an armored car company, barely made over $10 an hour, and got to handle millions of dollars and carry a sidearm for my job. I literally only had to qualify at the gun range to carry a weapon. That's it. I was putting about $150,000 in an ATM when out of the corner of my eye, I saw someone run around the corner at full speed towards me. Fight or flight is the real thing. I drew my weapon in a split second and almost killed him. He immediately hit the brakes and put his hands up. Come to find out, the ATM ate his card. He was inside the bank talking to the teller when she told him that I could probably return his card since I just opened up the ATM. He bolted from the bank to catch me before I left, scared the shit out of me. Community college did an active shooter drill, and the dumbass teacher didn't tell us it was a drill. I learned that day you can't rely on others to STFU and lie low in a situation like that. Soon as everyone started getting nervous, they were talking, lighting up their phones, and just generally making a racket. They had teachers walking in the halls and peering into the rooms to check if we were locked down properly. But at this point, we, the students, still weren't sure if it was a drill. So, when the first face hovered by the door and peered in, I nearly shit my pants. Only figured it must be a drill when I saw multiple people were walking in the halls. An hour ago, waiting for an Uber outside in Nashville, all of a sudden, shots fired, like 20 shots total. Everyone runs for cover, where there's little. It happened so quickly, it was hard to know what was happening. Scariest moment of my life, especially knowing that 2 minutes prior, we were standing in a way more exposed location. We were fine, but nothing on Twitter or the news. WTF. I nearly drowned. I was swimming way out in the ocean when a really bad storm came out of nowhere. I was a strong swimmer, but it didn't matter. I felt like my lungs were on fire and being shredded with knives. There was so much sand in the water that I couldn't see. I figured out which way was up by being slammed into the seafloor and swimming in the opposite direction. I was underwater long enough that I lost consciousness, and my last thought was, I'm going to die now, and nothing will ever hurt me again. When I came to, I was being dragged up the beach. I coughed and vomited up what felt like more than a liter of sand and seawater. Every time I blew my nose for weeks afterwards, more sand would come out. Being 19 at a house party in an unfamiliar rural town with mostly people I didn't know. Boyfriend and I were having an argument outside the house, and two guys decided to come out and pick a fight. Dropped my boyfriend and started wailing into him, while I tried to pull them off him and scream for help. No one heard me over the sounds of the music, but a friend had noticed the guys follow us out and grab some others to come investigate. By the time they got to us, I had ripped some hair out of one of the guys' heads and was balled up over my boyfriend's head and neck, trying to protect them while he was unconscious. One guy was trying to pull me off, while the other was still kicking my boyfriend. The partygoers pulled the guys off, and while I was in hysterics still screaming, they tended to my boyfriend. He woke up after a few minutes, and I wanted to call an ambulance and the police. The only problem was that there was no reception, and the house owners wouldn't give me their phone to use because they'd all been smoking pot and didn't want to get in trouble. I stayed up all night in a small room with my boyfriend, watching him to make sure he didn't have a concussion or pass out again or worse. It was an awful night, and I've never been more scared. Only took a few minutes, but it felt like hours. For a year, I lived in the Arctic, studying to be an Arctic nature guide. There were more polar bears than people, so that was quite a threat. Every time you went camping or anything, you'd have to carry a rifle. Anyway, I had 2 altercations with polar bears. The first one, we had all gone an 8-day excursion, and we stayed by the water, which you should never do. We had a garbage bin at the end of the camp. We had something called Polar Bear Watch, where we would take turns staying up 4 hours each, watching for polar bears. On the first night I had to do this, it was 2 a.m. and I was standing on the edge of a cliff watching. I saw a bear jump straight into the water and start swimming towards our camp real fast. I woke everyone up, screaming at them. Then we all gathered, stood in a group in front of the bear, and shot flare guns near him with rifles in hand. He kept approaching, then by like 7th flare, he turned around and swam away. My second encounter was when we went on a 10-day excursion even further away. It took about 10 hours to reach our first camp destination. I was responsible for a group of about 8 people, and it was my turn to stay up the whole night, looking out for them in case a bear joined us. So I stood outside in the snow, about minus 15 Celsius the whole night. Only about 3 hours in, I see something moving in the distance. Getting the rifle ready, I keep an eye out. Everything is white because of the snow, so it was really hard to spot whether it was a polar bear or not. I kept watching it, and it was so dark, polar night, eventually I realized it was actually a bear, and I screamed for everyone to wake up. We did the same thing, gathered in a group and shot flares, only it got even closer than the last one did, and it was a skinnier polar bear, which is a very bad sign. At some point, we shot a flare so close to it that it decided to turn around and run away. We slept on edge the whole night. I got stopped by the cartel in Mexico. I live on the border, and we decided to go eat some authentic tacos. My dad, my brother, and his blonde girlfriend and I, 12, We're driving to our favorite taco place when this truck behind us started honking at us. Unfortunately, there were 3 speed bumps in a row, right in front of us, so the truck got impatient and pulled up in front of us. Then they stopped at the intersection, which was right in front of us, along with another truck that was behind them and a van. Then, like insects, they all swarmed out of their vehicle with AKs and body armor. They lined up pointing to both our car and then down the street in the direction our car was facing. 2 guys started smacking the car with the butt of their guns and yelling at us to leave. Then they shot some warning shots at the ground in front of my car. My dad floored it backwards, while my brother shoved his white girlfriend into the floor, and I tried to become one with the seat. Almost died that day. At least that's what it felt like. Me, 17 on a rainy day with slippery tires, went through a corner too fast. 2 friends in the car with me lost control. Car swerved. We missed oncoming traffic by probably an inch. It happened in an instant. I regained control when the car was pointing in the driving direction again by lifting from the brakes, so we moved forward as if nothing happened. A week later, going around the same corner, an accident happened head to head. I was second on the scene and held a stranger's hand as they are trapped under the steering wheel, slipping in and out of consciousness in total pain while waiting for emergency services. I was asked to leave by the police when they learned I was not an eyewitness to the actual accident. But I knew what happened because I escaped a crash like this just a week before. I never asked people what happened to the people in the other car, and I do not know if the person I assisted made it. All I do remember is the total chaos in my memory of arriving at the scene, linked to my irresponsible behavior behind the wheel a week before. Reading these reminded me of something. When I was maybe 8, my family was at a huge Halloween party. There were probably 200 people there in this old schoolhouse. I was running around outside with my friends, and we somehow pissed off some older kids. They chased us and caught me while my friends ran away. The next thing I knew, they all grabbed my arms and legs and lifted me up. Then someone pulled out a knife and yanked at my shirt to expose my stomach. At that point, I started screaming and somehow struggled free. I ran inside and told my parents, but they didn't believe me. We were in Baghdad, 06. Sadr City was a mess. We got tasked out on a normal foot patrol. I was a gunner, and a sniper took a shot at me and hit me in what we called the chicken shield, the shield in front of my 50 and saw. It scared the ever-living shit out of me. One more. It was about 02 in the morning, and we were headed on a raid. I was the lead gunner, and about half asleep, when all of a sudden something nails me in the face. It was a damn bat. Also scared the shit out of me. This probably isn't scary to many people, but about a year ago in summer, I went whitewater rafting in Oregon with my family. Brother, brother's girlfriend, sister, sister's friend, dad, dad's girlfriend, and me. We all had life jackets on, so I wasn't very worried about drowning, and I'm confident in my swimming abilities. They don't do shit for you in rapids. So there are different classes of rapids. There are Class 1 rapids, which are pretty mild, and you can sometimes jump off from the raft and float down. Then there are Class 2, which are a bit more sketchy than Class 1, and you aren't allowed to get out of the raft while you're riding it. And then there are Class 3 and 4, which are dangerous, way more dangerous than 1 and 2. So we get onto the raft, and for the first quarter of the way, it was fun. Nothing scary happens, but we encountered a couple of Class 2 and 3s with smooth waters in between. At that point, our guide on the raft says that there is a Class 1 rapid up ahead and that we can ride it if we want. So my sister's friend, and I get off of the raft into the river and ride it, and we get to the point where it has a little drop, and I'm connected to my sister and her friend by our hands, and then my hand slipped, and I started to drift away from my sister. At this point, I'm freaking out because I'm not linked to them anymore, and I'm getting farther and farther away. Then the rapid hits, and I go underwater, where it felt like eternity, holding my breath and trying to breathe. Meanwhile, my sister and the raft is on the other shores of the new river, basically. My knee ended up hitting a rock in the water while this happened, which hurt a lot. At this point, we were out of the rapid, and I needed up getting back to the raft, and the rest of the ride was ruined for me. We were coming home from visiting family. Rural 2-lane paved road. My mom and 3 kids were in the car. I was driving. I came around a blind curve over a slight hill, and there was a little girl in the road, standing smack in the center of our lane. I slammed on the brakes and thank God stopped in time. I got out and picked her up. She was about 2 years old, crying. We heard some people nearby frantically calling and realized they were looking for her. We drove her over to her house. She had been playing in the yard and wandered off. If you have kids, you know how easily this can happen. Kids can move fast. I didn't judge. I'm usually the type who sees a pothole and swerves just in time to hit it square on. I'm thankful that, when it really counted, I reacted fast enough. My heart is racing just typing this out. It could have been tragic. I don't know if I would have been able to mentally survive hitting a child with my car. She was so tiny. Years later, I fell through a window and slashed my arm. 48 stitches. That wasn't nearly as scary as the little girl in the road. What was your scariest, a second later and I would have died moment? Don't think I would have died, but to change things up from car-related incidents, I once left a lighter near a fire pit by mistake, and I was near it roasting marshmallows. I had to go inside to grab chocolate, and I came back out, and just as I was walking back to the fire pit, the lighter exploded. Not me, but my brother. No, really. He had a hard time in college, didn't like his major, but didn't have any other ideas, had a hard time being motivated to attend class, etc. The final straw was when he ended a semester and was trying to get ready for the next semester. He was dropped by the scholarship that was paying his tuition for not making above a 3.5. He tried to hang himself in his closet one day. He told me right after in hysterics. He said he started blacking out and his head was fuzzy when his dog, half pit, half Australian cattle dog, positioned herself under him, barking, and released the tension on his neck. He got out of it and called me. He doesn't like to talk about it because it was really traumatic and, he said, embarrassing because of the stigma in our community. But he told me a few times that the instant he started blacking out, he regretted it and didn't want to die. When he called me, I had a grown man crying and saying, "It was so scary. I was so scared." Needless to say, the dog is highly regarded now. LOL, if you're in a hopeless situation, get help. Seriously, make a call. Fuck what people say or think. I fucking love you. Live, asshole. A second doesn't really apply to my story, but about an hour does. When I was in second grade, my appendix swole up and burst. I had severe pain for weeks while the doctors tried to figure out what was wrong. After staying at the hospital for some time, they suddenly said they needed to operate. They had finally figured out what was wrong and had to basically clean out my insides. Since it had burst quite some time ago, I was in a pretty critical state. If they hadn't realized soon after they did, I wouldn't be here. On 16th December 2004, I was with a friend having a beer in a bar on the Khao San Road in Bangkok, Thailand. It was the last week of my bumming round the world, and we had a decision to make. Do we go home for Christmas or spend it on the beach in Phuket? Neither of us had been to Phuket, and we thought it would be an awesome end to living out of a backpack for the last 18 months. But on the other hand, Christmas at home with the family was also appealing. So we flipped a coin and went home to the UK. Flipping that coin a second earlier or later could have sent us into the path of the 2004 Boxing Day tsunami. My husband tells me the day we met, he planned to kill himself on the way home. We met while both working at a theme park near our hometowns. They were just about to open a new roller coaster and opened it just for employees for a day. The train had 2 seats on each side, and my husband and I were both there alone and were matched up to ride together. It's a little scary to think that if I had been only a single person farther behind him, we would have never met. He said I saved his life because he had planned to wrap his car around a tree on the way home, but after we met and exchanged phone numbers, he was too excited to talk to me when we got home that he forgot all about it. I don't know if I would have died, but when I was very small, I woke up in the middle of the night with the feeling like the dog was missing. I woke up everyone in the house and we went looking for the dog. Somehow, we were all outside when a Molotov cocktail was thrown into the neighbor's house and their house exploded, setting only one room in our house on fire, mine and my sister's. If I hadn't had everyone frantically searching for the dog, who knows what would have happened. The dog must have known something was up too, because she had gotten out of the house and was hiding under the porch across the street. I briefly looked at my phone to skip a song on Spotify and barely missed walking right in front of my neighbor's truck. I didn't notice at the time and was actually told by said neighbor the next day. It's a weird feeling knowing that you're completely oblivious to almost dying. I was walking home at 2 a.m. and these guys in a truck started trying to run me over, and at the last second I dived into a small wooded bramble area and went the 7 feet to the fence behind it and hid. They then tried to find me for a while and left. I waited for an hour, probably then decided to sneak out. I saw their truck sitting at the end of the alley with no power on, so I snuck along the wooded area till it merged with the road and made a break for it. They almost ran me over again, but I made it to the path behind the house that was too narrow for them to fit, probably 2 seconds from being run over both times. When I was learning to skydive, I was trying to complete a level that involved turning 360 degrees clockwise and counterclockwise in the air. First 2 attempts, I could turn clockwise but not the other way for some reason. Cue the third attempt, jump, and again, clockwise goes like clockwork, if you'll pardon the pun, and so I try and turn anti-clockwise. But instead of going that direction, or just not turning like I previously had, I began to spin clockwise faster and faster and faster. I eventually spanned up to what I worked out to be 200 RPM, pulling about 15 Gs. I could feel myself blacking out and my arms being forced outward, but instead of pulling when I started spinning like I was supposed to, I kept fighting it and making it worse, and instead looked at my altitude and pulled when I would have done normally. Had I kept going and not pulled and blacked out, I could definitely have died from being tangled in my reserve. The spinning also caused all the capillaries in my eyes to burst, so I looked like the devil for 2 weeks. In 2009, my brother was killed by a drunk driver on a motorcycle ride. I was with him and avoided the truck by centimeters. My right mirror had red paint on it from the truck. That's how close I was. For a lot of years, I wanted to be the one who was dead, and I almost succeeded in quietly killing myself through obesity and ignoring health concerns. I've since tried to make his death have purpose by fostering special need kiddos and working to open a residential center for troubled teens in his honor. I miss that boy every second, but now it's my mission to make his life count for something big. A friend asked for a ride on my motorcycle, so I let him wear the spare helmet and took him for seafood at Neptune's Net in Malibu. Some of the nearby beach houses have driveways that lead directly onto the highway, so while we're on the return trip back towards Santa Monica, an SUV pulls into my lane. There was absolutely no time to brake. As a precaution against this kind of thing, I always watch the wheels of parked vehicles for movement, and I always rest the thumb on the horn, so I see trouble brewing, honk as soon as the other vehicle starts to move, and change lanes. The driver of that SUV neither saw me coming nor responded to the horn. The only reason we didn't have a T-bone collision was because of that lane change. I skirted around it with about 1.5 feet to spare. It wasn't the closest call I've ever had, but it was the only one where I was responsible for another person. I would have known to leap off the seat just before impact, but the passenger wouldn't. It turned out later he didn't even realize we'd nearly been in an accident, probably because his head was turned to enjoy the ocean view. The laws of physics made that swerve especially difficult because I'm a slender woman. The passenger weighed 40 pounds more than me. When I was about 9 or 10, I was in the basement helping my grandma do laundry. She had a big braided rug on the floor, and I was bouncing all over the place. I was wearing socks and jumping on and off the rug. She bends over to get something out of the dryer and reaches across the rug to grab something. I realize what she's reaching for is a snake, just inches behind the two of us. I yell at her to stop. We both scream and the snake quickly takes on an aggressive posture. I run outside and grab a broom, and my grandma starts beating the poor thing to death with it. Grandpa hears the commotion and rushes downstairs and delivers the fatal blow. Turns out that little nope noodle that snuck into the house was a venomous copperhead. Back when I managed a clothing store, I had to walk from the mall to the bank every morning to drop off the deposit. To get to the bank, I had to cross one street at a 4-way intersection. One day, as I was making my way across, a van was in the middle of the intersection, waiting to turn left, and was patiently waiting as I had the right to cross the street. Some douche in a black sports car apparently couldn't wait and swerved around the van and almost ran straight into me. The car was so close I could feel it behind my legs, and everything went in slow motion. Good thing I thought to start speeding up as I saw the lights start to flash, signaling the end of being able to cross, or I would have been hit. The asshole sped away, and I ran to the other end of the crosswalk A-OK. I was on the phone with my now husband when this went down, and he heard everything. I broke down crying when I got to the other side, and it wasn't because I was almost hit. The thought that my husband could have heard my death is what shook me up. Got one. Rolled up over a small hill and signaled left. No oncoming traffic, so I drift to the middle of the road on a lazy North Main highway. Start to slow and hear screeching brakes. Look to the rear view and only see grill of the pulp truck that just barreled over the hill. Impact. My truck is whipped around until I'm basically driver door to driver door with this semi. We slide across the oncoming lane and my truck drops into the ditch, but the pulp truck keeps going. The back of the rig starts tearing up my hood, then hits the crossbar by the door, more shattering glass. The whole side of the car begins to crumple towards me like a tin can. Can't tell if it's real time or I'm going to die slow-mo. Trailer and what's left of my truck stops at about 8 inches from my face or chest. Breathe and exit with almost no injury. Holy fucking shit. I was driving home pretty late at night after work when I still lived in my parents' house. Their house is about half an hour out of town on a good day, and you have to take rural highways and gravel roads with plenty of steep hills and tight curves. It was the first snow of the winter, and it came very suddenly and heavily. The roads were completely covered and slippery. I was making my way home slowly, barely going over 20 miles per hour. 1 second, it seemed like everything was fine. The next second, my car was sliding what seemed like way too quickly. It was moving at an angle directly across the oncoming lane of traffic, while a semi was approaching and going way too fast to ever slow down in time in the snow. Thankfully, my car got across the road and hit a snowbank in the ditch before the semi got to me. But if my car had slid just a second later, I can't imagine that I'd still be alive. So yeah, now I am deathly afraid of driving in snow and will do just about anything to avoid it. I've got a good one. I was doing a buffalo roundup on Antelope Island in Utah one year. They get a bunch of local people with varying degrees of skill and knowledge, but who all happen to own horses to ride around the island, rounding up around 300 head of buffalo at a time and moving them to the far side of the island where they have fenced off an area to hold them. It's for shots and medical evaluation, etc. My cousin brought me along because I always enjoyed riding horses with her, but I was very low on the skill side. To make up for it, I was way up there on eager, so I made sure that when we got to the fence line, I was right up front. The thing about buffalo with pointing out is that they are huge. Seems obvious, I suppose, but sitting up on my high horse, their shoulders still came to about my waist, and they look about 50% wider than a full-grown horse. They are intimidating. So, we get them all to this pen, but the problem is that the gate they all needed to go through was halfway along the fence, and all the buffalo walked right past it and into a corner. I was with a group that stopped right in front of the gate, making a barrier so they wouldn't pass back again, and a group went off to the side to try and coax the buffalo back our way. Here is where everything nearly went irreparably south. The buffalo were getting freaked out about being cornered, reasonably so, and the unskilled riders in the group hadn't picked up on that, so they kept putting more and more pressure on the herd. Soon, buffalo were scrambling for a way out, tripping over each other, ramming into the fence, almost broke it down at one point. Then, in unison, they all flip around and start running straight at me, an avalanche of 300 crazed, terrified buffalo stampeding straight at me. I remember realizing how bad it was, but not being afraid. It was too overwhelming to be afraid. I'd heard stories before about people standing in front of a tsunami or an avalanche as they rushed into them and feeling calm and small and in awe in the face of some utterly unimaginable force bearing down on them. For the first and so far only time in my life, that was what I felt. I looked back briefly to see if I could run my horse out of the way and was met with a wall of other riders. I clearly remember the thought crossing my mind, completely matter of fact. I guess I'm going to die. Luckily, the wall of riders that was blocking me from getting out of there also dissuaded the buffalo, and inches away from my horse, they all turned and ran through the gate. Nobody was hurt. I was working construction during summers back in high school. This is kind of hard to explain, but we were scrubbing the giant wooden beams that form the support structure of this barn or garage that was around 4 stories tall with a chemical that made the wood look better. Dumbest job I've ever worked on. Since it was a big building, we were using wheeled scaffolding with brakes inside to get to the roof beams. This building, being a garage as well, had long drainage troughs running the length to drain fluids from vehicle repairs and whatever else. The problem is that the drainage troughs didn't have grating over them at the time, leaving them completely open. So, as I was moving my 3-story scaffold from one beam to the next, both of the wheels on my side fell into one of the drainage troughs. You ever read those stories about mothers lifting cars off their children? It was one of those moments. Adrenaline kicked in, and I heaved all of that tube steel out of the back onto level ground, saving myself from being crushed, as the area I was in had nothing to stop all 3 stories from crashing down on my head. Nobody else saw a fucking thing. It all happened so fast. I took the next 2 days off work. Happened on a Wednesday, so I had 4 days off to recover my sore-ass muscles. If I had been anywhere but exactly in the middle of the broad side of the scaffold, I would have died 9 years ago. Alternatively, if I had been on the other side, I would have killed one of the other workers. I know this doesn't fit the exact letter of the question, since it's more about placement than timing, but people in real life don't usually believe me, so I don't get many chances to tell it. I was driving home late one night on a major freeway, and on a curve, when I turned the corner, when I noticed the car in front of me suddenly slow to a stop and turn on their hazards, so I did the same. We were going 75, so this was very abrupt and scary because there were cars behind me. The scene in front of me was horrific. A car had gotten onto the freeway going the wrong way, and there were major collisions littered all over the freeway of people trying to avoid them, and not more than 10 feet away was the car that caused it all, totaled, facing me. I couldn't even believe my eyes. No police, no fire department, and I was the first person to call 911. With cars going 75 miles per hour, 1 second later, and I almost certainly would have been involved in one of those crashes. I think about that moment all the time and feel so lucky that I avoided it so narrowly. Very first job site I was working on as an apprenticed heavy equipment operator. I had plenty of hours on this particular piece of equipment, excavator, but was still considered green by all accounts. 10 a.m. rolls around and it's coffee time. We're told to leave the machines idle while on break. So I flip my safety lockout knob, which disables all controls, and hop out of my machine. As I hop off, the machine's tracks, my unzipped Carhartt jacket, snags the safety lockout knob, re-engaging the controls as well as the left joystick, pulling it all the way back, stick up, and left, swing left. At first I wasn't sure what was happening. All I felt was something pushing my shoulder hard. As I turned my head, I realize what is happening, and my mind and heart start racing 1,000,000 miles a second. At this point, I'm freaking out, realizing I'm about to be cut in half by this machine, and there's nothing I can do about it other than fight. I fought and fought and fought for what seemed like forever, but in reality, it was maybe a few seconds. I managed to get my jacket unhooked with barely enough room to squeeze out from in between the track and the body of the machine. By far, one of the most humbling experiences I've been through, and made me truly aware of how powerful some of these machines are and how quickly things can go wrong if you're not on the ball.
What is the creepiest thing you've ever witnessed? I'm a paramedic, and had just put a car accident victim in a body bag with a decapitation from driving under a truck's rear trailer. Coroner gave us the okay to load him up. He was wearing a heavy jacket and sweater, so we just stuck him in the bag and began to load him. After we got underway to the morgue, I heard a noise and the guy was thrashing around in the body bag violently. I was out of my mind. This guy had 90% of his head missing. We pulled over, and my partner, who didn't see it, goes back and opens the bag while I was about to piss myself. All of a sudden, a very small chihuahua jumped out and ran up to my partner. He must have been in the guy's jacket pocket and been knocked out or just quiet until we got underway. Took me the rest of the shift to relax after that. 32 years in EMS, and I've never had anything like that happen to me. Me and my friend were walking home from a party, and we passed a generally abandoned campground. We heard a dog barking, which was unusual since it was 1 a.m. The bark sounded weird though. It kept persisting until we both realized what it actually was. It was a guy imitating a dog's bark. We heard insanely aggressive crunches coming from the woods, so we booked it back to my friend's house. Maybe not the creepiest thing ever, but it really freaked us out. running around my neighborhood at 3 a.m. with my friends in middle school. We were fucking around outside when we heard a cop car come flying up with its lights on. We dove into some woods to hide, and the cop car slowed down, put on its searchlight, and scanned the woods. We stood stone still, the four of us, until the cop passed. Then, all of a sudden, one of my friends sprint between us, off deeper into the woods. What the fuck? We start whispering to each other, trying to figure out which one of us had just run off. We walk out of the woods and realize that we were all there. Someone else had been hiding in the woods with us. This is only creepy in hindsight. My now ex-husband and I were living in a building with 9 efficiency apartments. We were the middle apartment on the 3rd floor. One day, the neighbor that lived directly underneath us knocked on our door. He came in and started apologizing for being short with us several days before. Honestly, he had no need to apologize. He was not rude or anything. We got home at the same time he did, and he politely told us he didn't have time to talk. We told him it was fine and then chatted for a few more minutes. He told us how we were really nice neighbors, and we joked about the time our cat got out and wandered into his apartment, probably thinking it was our apartment. Before he left, he said, "Hey, listen, I'm going to be working on a project, so if you hear banging and loud noises, don't get alarmed. When I'm finished with that, I'm going on vacation, so you won't see me for a while." We told him that was fine and didn't think much of it. About a week later, he was found dead in his apartment. The project he was working on was a scaffold to hang himself. Before he hung himself, he paid his rent in advance, left his door unlocked, and turned his heat up to 90 degrees. He had an ex-wife that he was feuding with, so we think he wanted her to be the one and the only one who would come looking for him and find him as a disgusting, decomposed mess. Unfortunately, he didn't account for the smell. We started smelling something putrid early one morning, so I called the rental office and had them investigate. I told them it was probably a sewer leak. The poor maintenance man walked in on the mess. So basically, the dude came up to say goodbye to us and to make sure we weren't on bad terms with him before he died. I wish we would have had a warning sign or something so that maybe we could have gotten him some help, but we weren't close with him and there was really no way for us to have known. About 9 p.m. in the winter, so pitch black outside. I lived in an end terrace house at the end of a road, so I'm the last house before the undeveloped section. Woman who lives alone, too. I generally had the light on in the room I was in. My PC was placed that I could see the front door in my peripheral vision. I hate dark windows because I don't like the thought of someone being able to see in at me while I can't see out. So customs build little curtains for door windows. Anyway, in my peripheral, just below my closed door curtain, I see the door handle twitch, as if someone had just quickly tried it. My doors are always locked at any moment that I am not directly traveling through them. I watched the door a while, but write it off as my mind playing tricks on me. Just as I got to turn back to my PC, I straight up watched my door handle be tried again, slower and more deliberate this time. They tested the entire travel of the handle to see if it was unlocked. I went flying upstairs and turned all the lights on to make it clear that I was home and I had noticed something. I threw open the window to look out the door, but my eyes were still adjusting to the pitch black outside. Someone ran from my front door into the undeveloped bit and kept going. I was either about to be the victim of a robbery, a rape, or a murder, or all three. But I've no doubt that having my door locked that night saved my life, and that without that curtain, the person outside would have been able to better stalk me or plan his attack. It's not that creepy in hindsight, but it weirded me out big time back then. I was probably 13, and I was sitting in my room playing video games by myself. I was a slob at that age, so my room usually looked like a dump. I was sitting in my mini lounge chair by the TV and had paused my game because I felt something staring at me. I looked around and didn't see anything. I started to play again. Felt eyes on me again, so I turned and looked around. Nothing. This happens on and off for about an hour. Finally, I paused my game to read my notes and drink my soda. As I'm putting the can down, I noticed that to my right, like 5 feet away, there is definitely something peering out at me. I had a bunch of papers from school all over my floor, so I couldn't really see what was going on over there. I very slowly turned my eyes to look over there without moving my head so that I could catch whatever it was in the act. I saw a small but decent-sized dark head duck down quickly when I caught a peek of it. I had a bunk bed and immediately launched myself up to the top of it. Fuck that. I couldn't see what the fuck that thing was, so I'm just looking and listening. After a minute, I hear rustling and see paper shuffling as this thing is running across the room. I'm straining to see what it is, since now I know I'm not imagining this. It gets to the bookcase, and there's a pause, and then I see the biggest ass spider of my life diving behind my books.
I think what freaked me out most was how self-aware it was. Like that fucker ducked when our eyes met. I've dealt with spiders before, and usually you don't get a reaction from them unless you start walking up to them or throw something. I never saw that particular spider again. I set off like 3 bug bombs in my room that night and probably almost killed my family because I didn't warn them and did it at 12 a.m. when everyone was sleeping, lol. I like to think I killed him, but I know he spent however long big-ass spiders live stalking me in the shadows. I was bathing my son in our old house. Mrs. was out and about. There was nobody else in the house, and if anyone was to come in the house, I would have heard the front door go. I was sat at the end of bath by the door, and I heard a knock on the door, which was right by my head. It made me jump because it was so close and loud. My son immediately perked up thinking it was his mama, and it didn't occur to me at the time that she wouldn't have knocked on the door because I communicated beforehand that I was bathing him anyway. But anyway, I said, "All right, babe," to which there was no reply. So I opened the door immediately and there was no one there. So I shut the door, and within a second of shutting it, knock, 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 harder this time. So I opened the door right on the end of the 3rd knock. Not a soul in the house. By the time, my son was confused and really worried. Naturally, I played it down and said it was mom playing a trick, while my heart was nearly bursting out of my chest. Scary shit. Long story. TLDR at bottom. House sitting for a couple with 2 dogs. I didn't know the couple well, but my brother's girlfriend did, so that was enough for me. They never mentioned they had a camera in their living room, but I noticed it within 5 minutes after I began house sitting. No big deal. I always act as if there are cameras around regardless. I noticed often that the camera would rotate and point at me if I wasn't in point of view. Creepy, but I wasn't really alarmed at that point. The point where I got alarmed was when the owners would text me and ask me how the dogs were doing, but conveniently, they only asked when I was not there. I never left the dogs unattended for more than a few hours, plus I had other stuff to do, so I wasn't going to sit around their house all day every day. It always made me feel awkward when they asked because I knew that they had to be checking the cameras frequently to notice this. My breaking point was probably my 5th or 6th night there. I was supposed to be sitting for 12 days, and I played a game with the camera. I would get up and move around the main area of the house, sit, and wait to see how long it took for the camera to rotate. I even went into the guest bedroom, which just so happened to be in the camera's view as well. On average, it would rotate and point at me within 10 minutes. My anxiety got the best of me at this point because I knew I was being watched way more than necessary. So I went into the bathroom to call my brother's girlfriend. I explained to her everything that was going on. She was very upset about it and said she wanted to come over and see how bad it was. While on the phone with her, I get a text from the owner asking, "How are the dogs?" And I casually reply and say, "Great, they're outside currently." I then peeked out of the bathroom and watched the camera rotate and turn to look outside. Brother's girlfriend came over, but I let her in through the sunroom, which was out of view of the camera. She watched me go through the whole ordeal while the camera and was beyond freaked out. We went outside and discussed how to approach this. Basically, we decided to politely call out the owners and tell them the constant checking of the cameras was inappropriate and extremely unnecessary. They got extremely defensive, said that camera doesn't rotate unless it's a motion activated or if the Wi-Fi is reconfiguring. I was already 2 steps ahead of them and told them that I had researched the exact camera and found out you can rotate it from an app on your phone and that it is not motion activated. It doesn't even give a notification if there is motion. Their response was them telling me to GTFO of their house, they weren't going to be accused of being creepers, and that I could keep the money. I took the money for the days I worked and left the rest. I wanted them to feel like shit, plus it didn't feel right taking it all. Not sure what their deal was, if they were just overprotective of their pets or creepy or both, but it was just beyond weird. In case anyone cares, I was 22 at the time, and they were a couple in their mid-30s. TLDR. House sat for a couple that watched my every move through their indoor camera. Fall 1988. My parents built a brand new house in a brand new subdivision on the edge of suburbia, bordered farmland. One evening, I was sitting in my room doing homework. My sister was in her room next to mine. My folks were downstairs. All quiet. About 5 p.m. or so, still bright out, no windows open. My 13-year-old sister, 2 years older than me, comes flying into my room all freaked out and said something strange just happened in her room. I followed her back, but she stayed in the hall initially. She pointed at her dresser, a solid wooden thing about 4 feet high, completely level. There were some odds and ends on top of the dresser, including a can of Aquanet aerosol hairspray. It was the 80s. She said it moved across her dresser by itself. I picked it up and placed it about 12 inches to the left and stepped back. It began to tremble a bit in place and slid in a quick, smooth motion to where it was when I picked it up. We both freaked out. Then I picked it up and repeated the action a few more times, maybe 4 more. It moved the same way each time, and then it stopped and would not repeat. We ran downstairs and told our parents. They would not listen and could have not cared less. Okay, this happened just last week. My mom and I had a really long year, her working at a school and me being in school, not the same school, so we decided to go to a nice spa, something we never do. Once we're finished, we go into the locker rooms and this old lady is just straight up changing in the middle of it instead of using one of the changing rooms. So, seeing a random half-naked woman is weird on its own, but it gets weirder because she somehow knew my name. This woman is just talking to me while changing like we've known each other for years, saying things like, "Oh, my boyfriend's daughter's name is my name. It's such a nice name," and shit like that. I'm just nodding along, smiling, a technique I've learned over the years of talking to my whack job of a grandmother. My mom comes out of the changing room, giving me a look like, "Who the fuck is this woman?" Which I silently reply, "I don't know." The lady finally leaves, and we see her again at the checkout blowing her money on the spa's skincare products. So I'm in no way religious or spiritual or believe in the supernatural, so I chalk this up to sleep deprivation, but sometimes I think about it and it makes me shiver. I used to go explore caves and abandoned mines with my brother and his friends when I was in middle or high school, and there was one day that we visited a mine. It was hard to get into. We had driven for a long time to get there. I had hardly slept, and it was dark almost immediately after going past this gate that was set up in front of it. Everyone else had walked ahead of me, and I was getting really nervous, using a shitty flashlight to see where I was stepping and avoid bits of snow near the entrance and a bit of water and rocks. Honestly, just worried at first about spraining an ankle or something. Anyways, I get maybe 100 feet into this mine, and everyone else is fairly far ahead of me, heading downwards, and the darkness of the cave was getting to me. It had never bothered me before, but it was so smothering. It felt like it was a substance I was breathing in. I was panicking a bit, and I heard someone whisper something into my ear. I said fuck this and yelled at everyone else that I was not going any further and went back out to the car. They were gone for another 30 minutes or so before they came back, which I was glad about since I was just calming myself down. One time, when I was about 11, I was asleep in my bed. Next thing I knew, I was awake, sitting on a table in my room in my underwear with my arms resting on my knees, staring down. Not sure how I woke up sitting down, and I'm really not sure how I woke up in my underwear, since I always sleep fully clothed. I just sat there for like 10 minutes, just staring down the whole time. I was somewhat conscious and knew I was awake, but for some reason I couldn't move. It was like one of those moments where you get stuck staring at something while you just think into a void. But I wasn't thinking, I was just staring. After those 10 minutes, I snapped out of it and immediately started bawling tears in complete shock of not knowing what just happened. I've told this story before. People say it was sleep paralysis, but I don't know, since usually sleep paralysis happens in your bed in the position you were sleeping. Maybe there was some sleepwalking mixed with sleep paralysis, but I don't know. While on a hike in the southern Appalachians in Alabama, I heard a very distressed squealing which sounded very much like it was a pig. The squealing was coming in my direction, through the trees. I couldn't see anything, but I panicked and so hid behind a tree. I began hearing the grunts of a frustrated man along with the squeals. I could not make out what the man was saying apart from, "Hold still, goddammit!" Eventually a pig came running through the woods wearing a women's lingerie. Shortly thereafter, a large man in his underwear came chasing after the pig, holding more lingerie items in his hands. Luckily, the man did not see me. I was very terrified. It felt like I got sucked into some kind of wrong turn or hills have eyes situation. I used to live in a townhouse complex, so our backyards were all close together, literally right up against each other, very tiny and cramped. You could hear and mostly see each other pretty clearly, but for the trees in the way. Basically, from any back-facing upstairs window, you might know if your neighbors were outside or if their dog was out or whatever. One day, I hear screaming and crying. Look outside, see a woman in my neighbor's backyard laying on the back porch on her stomach. I see someone grab her by the leg and try to drag her back inside. She's fighting and clawing, but they drag her in. I don't know what the fuck was happening, nor did the police, who told me everything seemed fine when they went over to check the house.
I wonder if they even went to the right one. They were notorious for fucking up addresses and being awful with directions in our neighborhood. So yeah, not sure if I witnessed a rape or a murder in progress or what. I still wonder about that woman sometimes. When I was a kid, my grandmother lived with us. She suddenly passed one day, and on that day, the ceiling light in her room stopped working. We didn't get around to replacing the bulb, but a few days later, we came home after the funeral, and the light had started working again. I don't believe in ghosts or any paranormal stuff, but it definitely creeped me out as a kid. When my grandma passed away in 2010, my parents and I flew down and stayed at her house. I slept in what used to be my mom's bedroom years back. The door would slowly swing back and forth, but the creepier one was the massive bang in the living room. We were all in the master bedroom, going through my grandparents' stuff. We couldn't figure out what the huge bang was and only heard it the one time. After my grandpa's passing a few years prior, we visited and stayed with my grandma for a bit. There wasn't anything weird going on after his passing, only hers. At the beginning of 2020, my mom passed away. I could feel her in the house. She passed in the hospital. We shared a home, and I had to clean out the upstairs where she lived. My close friend had also visited the day my mom passed and could feel her too. Every day I could feel her energy, and like she was watching me go through all her stuff and even apologizing to me. She was a hoarder. My 4-year-old, at the time, could see things flying around the house too. This home wasn't old and nothing ever felt paranormal before. This went on for a little while, then one day I felt like she had went to the other side. The landlord sold that home and I moved into a condo. I could feel her presence again right after moving in here, as though she was visiting my daughter and I, then she went back. Every once in a while I wake up in the middle of the night feeling watched. It's not so much creepy to me as it is interesting and even comforting, but of course, to others it would be kind of weird or creepy. I'm glad I'm not reading these at night again, though, lol. What's the creepiest thing you caught someone doing? I was in bed lounging around in my former boyfriend's house, who lived with his parents at the time, and I heard a knock. I ignored it because I was too sleepy to care. Then I heard the door open a crack. Maybe it was instinct, but I knew I was being stared at. I opened one of my eyes slightly and saw my boyfriend's dad peeking at me through the crack in the door, masturbating. We locked gazes and he scurried off awkwardly. I never returned to that house again and never told anyone. My neighbor stands in the backyard and stares through my windows. She also stands outside my apartment door and occasionally follows me into town and into stores. She's a well-known creep in town, but nothing can be done really because that's as far as she ever takes it also. My state doesn't have great stalking laws, so the police can't touch her either. When we were about 18 years old, my friend Rich was telling me he was being followed by a strange dude with long hair, beard, and mustache. He said he would turn around and see the guy following him from a distance. At night, Rich would look out his front window and see the guy standing in the middle of the road staring at his house. 2 weeks later, we finished up our band practice in our lead guitarist's backyard, and Rich left to put his amp in his car. A few moments later, Rich came running back terrified, saying the bearded guy was out front and that he was coming through the gate to the backyard. I saw the creep come in and he asked, "Rich?" a few times. Rich asked who he was and he said, "Doug." They'd been schoolmates, but Doug moved away for a few years and grew his hair long. Rich asked him why he didn't say anything earlier, and Doug said he was nervous about approaching Rich because he wasn't sure it was him, so he just stalked him for 2 weeks, and Rich was terrified the entire time. When I was a kid, I was home alone with my older sister. On either side of us, there were 2 girls that I was friends with. They rang our doorbell and begged to come in because 2 guys in a car were staring at them. We let them in and the car peeled out. We could have prevented a double kidnapping that day. That was probably around 1990. When I worked at a liquor store, I saw all manner of creepy things happen. I saw the creepiest was the guy who was obviously high on drugs. He was sitting on a bench, and he could not keep any part of his body still. Looked almost like he was having a seizure, but not quite. He gets up and moves away, but his method of locomotion isn't what I would call walking. It was more like vibrating from one area to another. He was like a shapeless amoeba in his movements. It was so bizarre that I couldn't do anything but just stare. Wish I had taken a video. Once, we were hanging out on a cliff near a beach on a summer morning around 7 a.m., 2 guys and 3 girls. It was a far place, so no much people know this place or go there. We were chilling when suddenly we saw an old man behind us jacking off and staring at us. He scared the shit out of us and we never went there again. I went to a homeschool co-op growing up. This kid a few grades behind me, I was in 11th, he was in 8th, I think, always would disappear to the bathroom to pretend to shit but was actually playing Game Boy. His teacher sent me to see what he was doing. I go in the bathroom and immediately he yells, "Go away, I'm going to the bathroom." I look under the stall from across the room. The boy's pants, underwear, socks, and shoes neatly in a pile in the corner. The boy was facing the toilet, laying on his back with his legs wrapped around the base of the toilet with a full-on little boy erection. We made eye contact. I went back to class. His teacher demanded to know what he was doing. I whispered it in her ear after she asked the third time. I got in trouble for some reason. I'm sorry. I'm the one who has the image of a toilet fucker in my head the rest of my life. I was hiking with my boyfriend, and we decided to go off-trail. We were about 3 hours into the woods in the middle of nowhere when suddenly there was a man in a suit standing about 30 feet away staring at us. We were like, WTF? After a few seconds, he just turned around and walked away. We checked the map, and there was nothing but woods for miles in the direction he went. Once, I was riding a late-night train from New York City. It wasn't crowded at all, maybe 4 to 6 people, so I decided to doze off a bit. I woke up and noticed that all the people were gone. I thought, fuck, I missed my stop, which is a 3-hour ordeal to get back. I saw a recognizable landmark, realized I'd had a ways to go yet. Then, I noticed that the seat in front of me had been flipped to face me. Legs, pants around ankles, and the largest penis I've ever seen. This guy has been jacking off to me sleeping. I'm a guy. I scrambled the F out of there into the car ahead of me. Once I entered the other car, I saw the same people that had been in my car. They fucking abandoned me to get a face full of jizz, which was thankfully avoided. Fucking traitors. Arrived early one morning for college, and the door was locked, lights off, so I just waited until my lecturer arrived. A new girl appears asking about the class. She just transferred from another course. Cool. So I'm filling her in on the class and classmates. Oh, and wait till you meet John. When suddenly the classroom doors unlocks from the inside, it's John, shirtless. I'm stunned. New girl is speechless, and without missing a beat, he says, "Sometimes I just love standing in the dark looking over the city, shirtless." Then he turns on the light, pulls on his top, and quietly sits at his desk. Here's one a bit different from the sexual and bathroom-related responses. I was living in a halfway house, and we had a chicken for dinner one day. Later that night, I went in the kitchen to get a midnight snack. There was a guy in there arranging the chicken bones from earlier into weird patterns on a table. I asked him what he was up to, and he looked at me very seriously and said he was summoning a demon. I'd never seen a demon before, so obviously I had some questions and hung around to see the show. Long story short, no demon showed up. It was both creepy and disappointing. This actually just happened. I took my daughters, 13 and 15, to Disney World a few weeks ago. We were waiting in the security line at the Orlando airport waiting to come back. If you've never been, the security line at the Orlando airport is super long and snakes back and forth forever, so you keep passing the same people again and again. I saw a guy, maybe in his 30s or 40s, take out his phone and appear to be texting, but when we went around the next corner, I could see that he was aiming the camera at my daughter, trying to take a picture of her. It only caught my eye because he did the zoom in thing on her legs. I said, "Oh, excuse me, can I help you? It looks like you're having trouble with your camera," right in his face. He got out of line. I probably should have told security, but my knee-jerk reaction was to get in between them and address him. A guy at work used to add a can of black beans into his bowl of chicken noodle soup. I used to think that was weird until I caught him pretending to be a 15-year-old boy on the internet so he could chat with underage girls. It was like a fake live stream, so it really looked like he was a kid too. Not long after, he was fired and arrested. When I was a kid, living in Russia, I would walk to school every day with my brother. One day I had to walk on alone because my brother was sick and he wasn't allowed to be in class. As I was walking, I saw this lady laying in the dirt. She was dressed like a nun and was screaming something at me. She then started digging the ground with her hands and kept looking at me and saying random things. That shit was demonic, lol. Every single comment in here so far is about kids. Let me try to remember a different example, even though I have kid examples too. So our neighbor is out of town for a couple of months. He asks us to keep an eye on his property for him. We lived in a rural area with a good view of his entire property from ours. One day a dude in a Jeep rolls up to his place. We watch him step into the property and start walking around going through shit. We drive over there, 4 of us. When we get there, he walks up. We ask him who he is and what he's doing here. He makes up some bullshit asking if a guy by the name of Ron or something is home, not the name of the guy who lives there. We tell him no, and ask him what the hell he's doing there once again. He said he wanted to buy a truck off of him that's sitting on the property and he's a friend of his. We asked him his name and he said, it's Jeff. Like he had to think about his own name. Meanwhile, he's got 4 pretty big dudes all standing around him asking him this stuff. He's getting nervous. Eventually, he gets in his car and leaves. We call the neighbor and tell him what happened, and we call the cops who didn't bother to even come by. The truck he was rummaging through, though, was missing a couple of small parts. 2 weeks go by, and one morning we wake up to find his truck, his trailer, 2 jet skis, and his sports car stolen. We call the cops and make a report. We found the jet skis and trailer down the road where they crashed it and left it. They weren't caught. I was hiding in my sister's closet so I could jump out and scare her. I must have been 8 or 9, her 7 or 8. So I was in there waiting for the perfect moment to scare her, peeking through the closet door crack. And all of a sudden, she grabbed her piggy bank. That was a 3-foot-tall Tigger from Winnie the Pooh, brought it to her bed and started making out with it. I was so taken aback, confused, and disgusted, I barged out of the closet, scared the shit out of her, and ran out of the room. Moral of the story, don't hide in the closet. Holding a girl hostage in his dorm. They were arguing. I went over and let them, mostly her, know I was next door if she needed anything, left my door open. They left at some point, then returned with the guy's big friend. As well as I could hear through the walls, she was suicidal, and he figured the best thing to do was tie her up and guard her with his friend who was a bouncer. I had no idea what to do, but I had to do something, you know? A night patrol officer came through, and I asked the boys if they had called her. They were all shifty, and the officer was like, excuse me, what's happening? And the cops took it from there. She came by later and said she spent the night in the hospital and was going home with her folks and thanked me. Apparently they tied her up with belts. It was fucked up. Had some really weird neighbors who lived in the apartment directly across from mine. The kids were maybe between the ages of 18 and 23, and they were fucking weird. I would always walk out and catch their sister rubbing their brother's dick of their brother playing with her tits, very casually while unlocking their door or waiting for their father or something. Just normal everyday incest, I guess. But something that really creeped me out was watching them randomly bringing home this large cabinet closet thing. Seemed like it was seriously heavy. I didn't think much of it at the time. I was just bitchy because they made a lot of noise doing it. Anyway, after they brought in the cabinet thing for a week straight, I would randomly hear and feel this thumping or pinging noise, like someone was taking a sledgehammer to concrete. We lived on the bottom floor, so my first thought was that they were doing something weird with the floor. After the week was over, I caught them moving the cabinet back out. Now, I know the imagination can turn something like this into something much more than it actually is, but I put 2 and 2 together and remembered a couple of weeks before coming home to a young man searching the complex and asking if I saw his friend. Said his friend came here with the boy next door and now he couldn't find him. He looked very distressed. Pretty sure they murdered someone. I don't know. When I was in comprehensive school, aged 14 to 15, I used to get the bus back home at the end of the school day. There was always this creepy old guy that would sit in the same seat on the same bus as me every day. I never really thought much of him apart from that he often would stare at me. One day, there was an empty seat, a rarity as it was a busy bus more often than not. It was on the aisle next to his. He began a conversation with me over the empty seats about my schoolwork and started asking me when my birthday was, year included. I found this pretty weird, so I just lied and got off the bus a little sooner than my stop. A few days later, I brushed past him when I got on the bus to sit at the back so I could escape his stares and not be noticed. He hadn't noticed me, so I felt a bit more at ease. When getting off the bus, I looked over at this notepad he was drawing in and saw he was drawing a picture of me. The fake birthday date I gave him was also noted on the page. I stopped getting that bus from then on. One night, I went with a girlfriend to her boyfriend's friend's house to drink so she wouldn't be the only girl. Later on, her and her boyfriend leave to go home. I decide to stay because my car is there and they seem like chill dudes. Bedtime comes around and I'm going to crash on a couch in the basement. All is well until I hear something on the stairs. I open my eyes and see one of the guys creeping towards me. He notices my eyes are open and says, "Oh, you're not supposed to be awake," then scurries upstairs. I'm not proud of it, but I left immediately and drove when I probably should have taken a cab. I obviously tell my friend, and the next time I see the guy, I'm met with, "Oh, that's just Bob. He's weird, but I'm sure he didn't mean anything by it." Did not drink with them again. I went through airport security with my mom and my 2 oldest kids and my son who was a baby. After we got through taking the shoes off and such, I immediately set up the stroller and put my son in while we put our shoes on and gather our belongings. I'm sitting at the very end gathering my belongings covered with security, so I face away from son and get my shoes on and jacket on. In that split second, he was gone. I hustled around looking for him and couldn't find him or the stroller. Security looked at me like I was mad and somehow my child disappeared while they were all milling around. There was no sign of him in the airport. I saw a store and ran in there. Mind you, my mom is rushing around with an older 2. We are completely frantic. No help from TSA because they just seem to not care. Then I seen a weird older lady with blonde hair pushing him around. At first I thought she may have been senile. However, she ends up pushing him to an older man and younger woman and walking along fine. The 3 of them with my baby. I ran up to them and grabbed the stroller and said, "What are you doing?" None pretended to know what I was saying or English. However, I reported them and nothing was done. What I find extremely off was the fact that the people she's walking and talking with pretended not to notice she's pushing a child around that was never with them. If she happened to be senile, anyone would say, "Where the hell did you grab that baby from?" and try to find the parent. Nope, they stole my baby and nonchalantly walked away with him. I have no idea what was happening, and it still creeps me out to this day if the intentions were harmless, or they wanted a child, or worse, wanted his organs harvested. I don't know what made them think an airport would be a suitable place to steal a child. They were not in line with us, as far as I could tell, so they were allowed to come behind the barriers in front of security and steal my son from me. I was almost worried there may be something else going on that they were able to do this with no interference.